once again, hello to everyone. We can start our final session. And the first speaker will be Lorenzo Marinucci.
Okay, shall I share the screen, the presentation screen now? It's good afternoon, morning, evening, everybody. My name is Lorenzo Marinucci. I'm Associate Professor of Aesthetics and Italian at Hawai'i University. And I'm trying to approach Kuto Soku, Nishitani is like 1982 essay, from a specific point of view. This paper was like more difficult than I expected because I realized that I had written something way bigger, way more complex than I first thought. So I had to diminish my expectations. Please do the same. My title of my presentation for today is Imagination and Non-Obstruction. I use the word non-obstruction to translate the Japanese Buddhist term muge, and which might be like a very specific, even like really specific way of approaching. But I'm trying to understand how, like, what's the meaning of this word in Nishitani? What's the relationship within its cultural heritage and his specific take on that, and the way in which this Kegon, Buddhist Kegon notion, again percolated or seeps into his philosophy, not just in 82, but like throughout his intellectual career. So that's the notion of muge, non-obstruction, and there are with two more specific articulations. One is riji muge, non-obstruction between principle, ri, or li, and phenomenon, like fact, ji. And jiji muge, non-obstruction between phenomenon and phenomenon, between event and event. I was introduced for the first time to the notion of muge almost 10 years ago, and as I first read Kutosoki in the original Japanese, and I was deeply intrigued by it. Because unfortunately, the English translation by Marra makes this term invisible. So it directly translated as unhindered, never discusses it, there's no footnote about it, omit in the Japanese or Chinese reading of it. And this is what I would like to do today. So my first hope was much more ambitious, because wondering whether Nishitani was an isolated philosophical revival of this concept, or there was a wider net of muge in 20th century philosophy. I was impressed by discovering how major intellectuals such as Suzuki Daisetsu, Izuki Toshike, and the way less known but equally interesting Doi Torakazu all wrote extensively on Kegon Buddhism, paying a great deal of attention to this very notion of muge. And hopefully, so this is a project for the future. So, just like Ku, Mu, Soku itself, muge is a Buddhist technical term which Nishitani, and just not Nishitani, employs in a new, it's a new and profoundly original way. So maybe it's a twist, in a sense, like it's not a philological employment. And it works out a theory of imagination crossed by the tension between the metaphysical and phenomenological approach, which again, like it's already present in muge somehow. So first detail that makes muge stand out among the many references to Zen in Nishitani's philosophy is that the idea of muge, Chinese way, is one of the defining ideas of Kegon, Hawaiian Buddhism. So arriving in Japan during the Nara period, Kegon greatly predates the development of Japanese Zen, exerting a major influence on its development. Suzuki Daisetsu argued that the theoretical position of Kegon was then completed somehow by the practice-oriented Zen. So much that the schools themselves are like thought and presented in a sort of spiritual non-obstruction in his studies on Kegon, in his Columbia lectures in the 1950s. The Avatamsaka Sutra, the main sutra inspiring Chinese Hawaiian and Japanese Kegon, is a massive piece of Buddhist literature defined by Thomas Lear as the most grandiose, the most comprehensive, the most beautiful array of the Buddhist scriptures. And then Paul de Neuville stresses phantasmagorical overflow of visionary images, which multiply everything to infinity, teaching the interpenetration of the one wall and the particularized many, or spirit and matter. And Fox even calls it fractal, holographic, psychedelic. And most known, probably the best known image to visualize the fractal transcendence of the Avatamsaka of Kegon is the indra's net. So like an infinite net of infinite jewel, each jewel like reflecting, again, like there's a transference, like an image of everything. The whole net and every single jewel are contained as an image within that. The third patriarch of Chinese Hawaiian, Fa Zhang, one of the most influential commentators of the Avatamsaka, repeatedly built a mirror hall, 8 mirrors plus 2 for ceiling and floor, at the center of which a Buddha statue and a candle completely created this infinite spectacle, a visual presentation of the ultimate truth, verbally described in the sutra. So this is a Yayoi Sama infinity room. I'm not arguing that she's influenced by Kegon, but there was actually no images of the actual Buddha room. that Fazang repeatedly did for Empress Wu. But again, I would say that this is actually quite a good example between lights and surfaces and infinite depth within a especially closed enclosed room. Like we get a sense of infinity and infinite multiplication. So and like a similar something that came to my mind. I was wondering about like mirror rooms is that we have something similar in like the mirror hall in Versailles. And that's interesting how the mirror in this case is gonna thought as a way of multiplying ego rather than transcending it. But that would be a very much like a how to say a comparative metaphysics of mirror. Be not for today. So because I'm interested in Nishitani's take on Muge, like I'm not trying to buy the very big apple on what's Keigon Buddhist per se. Again, indeed, looking at the way in which Nishitani is deploying the word Muge in the text Soku, three things came to my attention. The first one is it does not introduce us a specifically Buddhist notion. Neither its origin nor its specific use in the context of religious belief or practice are mentioned. He's not really discussing about Keigon here. He just says Muge, Jimuge. And we'll see, it's a constant pattern. Ishii, in an insightful article on the political relevance of Keigon Buddhism within the Kyoto school and throughout the 20th century, mentions how Nishitani had organized an Atamsaka Sutra study group and studied Keigon philosophy, like during the 20s. No, like maybe like late 20s or 30s. And that's all I could find about it. So like we know that there was a graduate school seminar about Keigon Kyo, and that's all. Together with Oyama Iwao, but does not add a specific time frame, neither mentions published materials on it. This leaves the status in the text quite hazy, and this discrete influence is unfortunately made completely invisible in Marra's translation, as I mentioned. So the second point I would like to stress, immediately following from the first one, is the relevant shift occurring in the meaning of the term. As Nishitani seems to represent Muge as distinctive moment in the phenomenology of imagination, rather than through the ontological epistemological lens of Keigon. Again, we can argue it's not such a clear-cut distinction. We could say, no, Keigon has all, like maybe like all Buddhism, phenomenological takes on things, but the theme of imagination is something like added by Nishitani. And again, like talking about mirrors or the Fazan example of a lion made of gold. I mean, yes, there is this tension towards the status of images in Keigon already, but I would say that it's stronger in Nishitani's take. In the original framework, the mutual permeation of phenomenomic events, G, and the reciprocal indifference with the absolute principle, Ri, is presented as the ultimate truth of reality, the pivoting phenomenomic manifestation as real truth, a kind of vision reached by the bodhisattva or a deep meditative stage, not something related to daily image consciousness. The third interesting feature, like I will concentrate on this last one, in Nishitani's introduction to Muge is not only that it's not specifically specifying anything about its Buddhist or Keigon background, presenting as something related to imagination rather than enlightened consciousness, but he decides to introduce it in a long discussion of Basho's Haikai, which effectively occupies the central part of the long essay. This is made even more perplexing because Basho, who's closer to Zen, is also an exaggeration often, has to the best of my knowledge absolutely no affinity with Keigon Buddhism in particular. Maybe, like as I was writing, I actually came to qualify this first impression, but like historically, he's not really interested in Keigon. The closest to the idea of Muge that we can find in Shomon and Basho's Haikai is the idea of hibiki, resonance, or nioi, perfume, a mutual permeation between verse and verse in the practice of intersubjective composition that was necessary to create chain-link poetry. Each verse and poetic subjectivity, neither too far nor too close to those coming before and after, in a state of mutual permeation, we could argue. But Basho never used Keigon terms to describe that. But while this tense has been interpreted in the light of Hu and Shunyata or elsewhere, for instance, by Watsuji, we cannot defend a straightforward inclusion of the category of Muge throughout any peculiar point of Basho's work. This is Nishitani's own addition. Although I have to admit that as I kept writing this draft, I realized how Nishitani's choice might be less arbitrary than I first assumed. Recap. Nishitani's poetry arises out of language that presents an absolute event, G, even when it's illogical and unreal. There is, in other words, a kind of non-obstruction, Muge, between the single linguistic imaginary event and the level of ideality as principle of truth, that is nothingness, B. In this sense, as for such, imagination reveals something essential about the world, thanks to our power to effortlessly, instantaneously distance ourselves from it, annihilate it. Things in fact are characterized by their absolute suchness, their being stubborn facts, denying their mutual correspondence and permeation when they're taken as individual realities, as in our most conventional daily point of view. However, when the thing, never ceasing to be one, comes to mean a piece of the word, it also exists as a place. And it comes out of itself within itself by acquiring a nimbus of transparency. There's a characteristic of images. Elsewhere, I tried to clarify this point by using the image of a stone. Let us think of a stone. It's hard, it's discrete, it's impenetrable. It's a very good example of an object as Gegenstand. And the character for abstraction itself, like the Ge, has in this stone as a radical. And even a stone, however, without ceasing to be a stone, can be transfigured through the emotive permeation that makes transparent the whole of being. And far from being characteristic of secondary reproductions occurring, so being begins to become transparent from within itself. So the stone, rather than being a thing, it's a place, like a transparent field that can host other phenomena within itself. The shift fundamentally is the passage from the actual reality to an image. In that moment, when it loses its obstructive matter, its obstructive quality is not the stone as a real thing anymore, it's stone as an image. And far from being characteristic of secondary reproductions occurring in our heads, as in the Platonic Cartesian Kantian model of Einbildungskraft, like the self-emptying state is a paradoxical but primary quality of all things in the world, as they become images before ourselves. Objects of a specific kind of consciousness, something wider, more open, active and passive at the same time. The model that, according to Husserl, was better expressed by the German word Vorstellung. So things we imagine are not inside our head, instead of consciousness, they are out, like they're an expansion of our being in the world. In this moment, by realizing themselves as nothing, themselves as a nothing, which however brings with it tone, vision, rhythm, movement, a bodily dynamic, they can unfold the inner landscape hidden within being. This transparency, which in Nishitani is repeatedly presented as something atmospheric, both in the sense of an emotional stimulus and as liberal air, is his original progression on the psychedelic, or let's say mirroring media muge of Keiko. Let us keep exploring the example of a stone. I want to quote another famous hokku by Basho, written not far from Sendai, actually, on the cliff of Yamadera, which perhaps Nishitani had in mind because he keeps talking about cicadas and their voice. It's a very famous one. Shizukasa, shizukeza ya, iwa ni shimiru seni no koe. Stillness, seeping into the rock, the voice of cicadas. The rock is a rock through and through, and however, in Basho's hokku, the obstructive reality of an actual stone is also negated, transforming it into a translucent, non-obstructing image permeated by the voice of insects. Not actual cicadas, but a transfigured sound that in turn contains cicada themselves as an image. And yet there's more layers of mutual permeation between them. Because before visiting Rishaguji at Yamadera, the place where Basho wrote this hokku, I always imagined Basho looking at a single stone, B, not one, or at the plural stones in the temple garden. And I was wrong. Because the rock mentioned by this hokku is not any kind of stone, but rather a cliff called the Tokono Iwa, incense rock. A naked spot in the cliff of Yamadera that is riddled with erosive marks, making it look like a piece of aloes wood, ginkgo. In a typical Japanese visual trope called mitate, and actually typical of Edo period, developed first in Haikai and then in ukiyo-e, the huge cliff can be seen as a much smaller, infinitely precious piece of aloes wood, an object in itself meant to be transformed from solid to aerial, from former doctor, formless object, formless perfume and atmosphere. The stone is opened twice, first by imagining sound seeping in its own surface, then by seeing the stone itself as a block of perfume in wood, powering outside itself and waiting and wafting in the valley as an atmosphere. That of seeing as, family described by Wittgenstein and philosophical researchers, an ambiguous permeation of perception, G, and principle, or idea, Ri. In a sense, Nishitani is not wrong at all in advancing, through poetic example, what I call this phenomenological turn in the notion of muge. If one had to ask how sun and perfume can belong in deep unity with wood and rock, we can answer to Basho hokku. And in Akari Sansui, that's the Daisenin, that's the very heavy, mitate heavy, like Akari Sansui garden from like the Tokuji, Daisenin. What pebbles can correspond to an immense ocean, so that the wet is seen in the dry, the still is seen movement is seen in stillness, and less vasted in a limited garden, etc. Indeed, rephrasing the intellectual background of mitate up to no keigo notions of muge seems to me another promising approach for a study of Japanese visual culture. So perhaps what is most seducing, long permeation, like a switch to another section. What is most seducing haikai for Nishitani, however, is the fact that Basho's poetry can be constructed as a middle space. It is dealing with a kind of experience that is not yet fully transfigured in the dazzling like psychedelic holography of Kegon text, but on the other hand is distinctly spiritualized. It hovers in a middle space between the mundane, soku, and the transcendent, like you say, hijiri, say. In fact, the apparently arbitrary use of the word muge to apply to Basho's poetry and existential stance surfaces in Nishitani's for decades before Soku. For instance, in Basho Nitsuite from 1965, Basho is often used the word way, principle, way, do, or principle, ri, or way, principle, dori. That's in order to say that the principle of fueki, unchanging, and the shift of ryuko, changing, current, the shifts of what is current are, as I argued, the fact G of today, are one and the same. Basho employs the expression fueki ryuko. Fueki ryuko means that the actual existence of human beings, its truth, arises in this shape, and that at the same time, the fundamental spirit of arts is such a thing. And that something even bigger, the myriad of things, the creative, zoka, is at the same time unchanging and current. I think that Basho intended fueki ryuko in this form. And the way, on the other hand, as the character of something is always the factor today, flowing, ceaselessly changing, and at the same time, however, it has a fact since all times. It's an ancient facts and contemporarily the factor today. That's fueki ryuko, or repeating. Both in Chinese and Japanese poetry is such a way. And in fact, fueki ryuko are one. In Kegon Buddhism, now he's actually mentioning Kegon here, there's the expression rijimuge, non-obstruction between principle and fact. But we can also say that the eternal principle and today's fact, its change, the shift of what is changing, are in a state of non-obstruction. And then, even more interesting, non-obstruction means to be free, jiu, and unbound, jizai. Jizai is one of the other terms that we classically used in Kegon in conjunction with muge, but it's described to be the state of a bodhisattva, not this freedom is unbounded. The second term, jizai, is another Buddhist term used to describe the free floating state of a bodhisattva. And I think that this sense of freedom and dynamic floating is another important connection between muge and the phenomenology of imagination in the active, dynamic sense stressed by Bachelard, for instance, who criticized the way in which the study of static images forgot to consider their internal dynamic character, the weightlessness or even flight that is experienced bodily by and through imagining as an active verb in the living body, which discovers the pure freedom of jizai through the flight of fantasy, through the kind of like embodied, like perceptual incarnation of emptiness. Nishitani seems even close to this position in another, even an earlier mention of Basho's muge, in the essay Basho Nyokerukyo from 1948. Here I'm translating from the Japanese, but there is a German translation available from Professor Hoashi, if I'm not wrong. So, in the case of Basho too, as in the Gospels, because he begins by quoting John's Gospel, talking about wind and spirit, the spirit of art blows within him like wind, turning him into a madman. This madman heart is his artistic soul, the wellspring of his poetry. There is something within his 100 bones that's the beginning of Oinoko Bumi. And this madness is an existence without any abiding, an existence that is just like wind. It is a way of discovering peaceful abiding, anju, within non-abiding, muju itself. For Basho, this is the way of wind grapes, fuga. At the same time, this peaceful abiding consists in a creative process. Madness is to be within the wind and follow the wind, like a kite with a torn string. We'll go back to this metaphor. But this is not only that. Within that wind, there is also a single thread. There's also like a quote from Oinoko Bumi, Hitotsunosuji. Without breaking away from the non-obstruction of being in the wind and following the wind, kaze no mani mani no muge, koze no mani mani ni no muge to yaburadzu, and without tying up one's freedom, the single thread in the artistic creative life is the single thread in the artistic creative, peacefully abiding in the non-abiding. In this passage, the introduction of muge is even more casual and unexplained, I would say. But on the other hand, the theme of madness, holding a peaceful, powerful place in the literary religious history of Japan, is a very good way of connecting creative process and religious, or at the very least, spiritual experiences. From the cynical point of view of a modern Western man, one in which the imaginary function is atrophied, as Bachelard argued, or one that has forgotten the crisis of presence, to discuss Di Martino's study on magic and madness. The dazzling vision of Mahayana are no more than superstition at best, or illusion, madness at worst. Indeed, one of the social factors of Zen's huge global popularity in the 20th century is the easiness in which, compared to many other Buddhist traditions, it could be remythologized and zaubert. Nishitani discussed this original co-belonging of religion and magic again in Soku, quoting one's visionary passage from Dogen Uji and stating that the place given in this example is the place of unhindered things, which has overcome the place of unhindered reason. Magic, moreover, displays the grounds of magic and belief, which are usually seen as opposites, are included together and overcome. Like this connection between magic, madness, miracles, and religion has been discussed already yesterday. One more trait of continuity within this much earlier text of Soku is Nishitani's attention for the atmospheric experience as a locus for this non-obstructed or unhindered, that is wholly free, but not undetermined manifestation. Wind is movement, madness, and poetic spirit, which is like a very strong tradition of like attributing this kind of characteristics to the actual experience of atmosphere, wind, and air in Japanese culture. But there's one more element in this quote that points to a pretty interesting notion in haikai theory that I would like to discuss here. We saw a kite with a broken thread floating in the wind, which that's another image, which might seem beautiful but random, but actually is a reference to a relatively obscure piece of haikai literary theory, the Haikai Uyamuya no Seki from 1763, dealing with our muge-like pair of unhindered opposites, shaping the hazy space of Basho's folk poetics. That's full, real, jitsu, and hollow, empty, kyo. As the thread of my kite snaps, it falls from the clouds. And that would be jitsu. That's a standpoint of reality. And then ito kirite and humoto narikeri ikanobori. Its thread has snapped, and my kite is gone, turned into a cloud. That's kyo. That's a pure lie. It's like a fantasy moving away from a position of experience. But then it's a third option, which is not a dialectical synthesis, is presented. Ito kirite kumoto mo narazu ikanobori. Its thread has snapped, and yet my kite doesn't turn into a cloud. In the third case, called sho as an example of correct, rectified style, shofu, or the Basho style, shofu. That's a pun on the same reading of the cutter for banana and correct. We find a dynamic in which reality and unreality are not opposed but overlapped in a unitary scene. As this thread snaps, the kite does not turn into a cloud. It's a grammatical. What does the grammatical negation produce? The third final moment in a three-moment dialectic, usually identified as a synthesis, something that like holds them both as a unitary whole. But what would the synthesis between imaginary and real exactly imply? Because there's no synthetic higher level, I would argue, not even a mixture in any simple sense. Just that is happening in the phenomenological metaphysical muge of Wakiruko. In the case of Kyojitsu, we must think of a total permeation between the concrete fact and the unreality or surreality, if you use these words, as we see. By saying that the kite does not turn into a cloud, the grammatical negation does not obstruct or erase the unreal image of this information, but leaves the kite suspended, both logically and as an image, neither falling nor flying away. The discourse on Kyojitsu is often thought as a somewhat apocryphal commentary to Basho's composition, since only one of his disciples, Kagami Shiko, bases his interpretation of haikai on it. And already during the Edo period, the writings by Basho, the alleged writing by Basho, on which he based this interpretation, were recognized as forgings. And anyhow, according to Shiko, the 10,000 things act in reality as they abide in unreality. If they were to stand in full reality, how could they act in imagination? Real things stand out in the reality, and they are the real attachment. In Renga, it is such reality that make people sad for the scattering of cherry blossoms or pity the waning moon. But cherishing things unreal, that is the reality of haikai. Chinese poetry, waka haikai, and all from the beginning, the arts of skillful lying. Earlier, I argued how in Basho we do not really find something similar to movement, but in the reflection of Kyojitsu, and let us bracket for a moment the problem of whether or not it actually coincides with Basho's own thought on the matter, we find an impressive theorization of the ironic attitude of haikai, something that hasn't been mentioned, I think. But like haikai is originally an ironic comic verse that's simultaneously able to create and annihilate, in which the artist must combine in all directions into one synoptic view, soaring above everything and destroying everything. And I'm not quoting Basho here, but it's Zolga, Erwin, like a typical formulation of romantic irony. The relationship between irony and non-obstruction would also be a wonderful problem in comparative thought. Nishitani himself recognized elsewhere how a certain kind of laughter can arise from a standpoint of mutual permeation and emptiness, as in the episode of Enen and Jaco analyzing the I and Thou relationship in Zen Buddhism from 69. No, earlier. Sorry, this is like 69 should be the English translation if I'm not mistaken. Today, however, I would like to keep going back in time and put forward a hypothesis on what kind of occasion gave Nishitani a chance to reflect on Basho's poetry through the category of Hanindra permeation, Muge, for the first time. Because a perfect chance for Nishitani to glimpse Kegon metaphysics through the apparently very far surface of haikai poetry occurred a few years before the 1948 essay during a wartime roundtable on Basho's poetry published in 1945 as Basho Keinkyu in Gakkai, Taitoa Gakujutsu Kyokai, from like January to May of 1945. So I assume that the actual meetings must have occurred sometime during 1944. There is something moving on reading about a group of intellectuals so intensely discussing about tiny poems during the war. Only 3 hokku analyzed over 5 long meetings, like and the publishing is really terrible quality paper. So like if you're interested in the PDF, it should be downloadable through the QR. I would like to, it's not easy, like there are not many copies left. So if you're interested, please download it. So the haikai specialists participating to the roundtable were Ebara, Taizo, and Oyoshi, professors at Kyoto University. And the other 6 participants, apart from Nishitani, were the sinologist Yoshikawa Kojiro, Ogawa Shigeki, the Germanist Oyama Teichi, and the poet and screenwriter Yoshi Isamu, and most importantly, the fellow philosopher Doi Torkatsu. The former, having leading intellectuals from different fields freely discuss about how Basho haiku was not even new. The wartime meeting followed the scheme of older Basho haiku Keinkyu, something chosen in the 1920s, which shared by Kodaro Han, and include big names such as Watsuji Tetsuro, Abejiro, Abe Yoshishige, and so on. Like it's published in the 1924. Of all the participants, the name that clearly stands out, both for his closeness to Nishitani and to Kegon, is that of Doi Torkatsu. Another student of Nishida Tanabe, he became a lecturer at Kyoto University in 1941 and was greatly interested in the works of Nietzsche and Goethe. In 1948, however, he left Kyoto and was charged by the superintendent of Todaiji in Nara, Kamisaka Kakayun, or the first complete translation of the Kegon Sutra in a Western language, which was German. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why Doi is not that famous despite his huge achievement. He published several more, he said, but one that specifically deals with Kegon Buddhism in a philosophical perspective is the 1974 Jikanto E. So he was interested, again, in like Muge from the standpoint of temporality, like eternity and time. As we saw maybe in Fuekiruko. In the 1945 roundtable, neither Doi nor Nishitani explicitly used the Muge, but their discussion of the first hokku in the January issue really seems deep drenched, permeated by a Kegon mindset, and anticipates almost 40 years before Kutosoku some of the key elements in Nishitani's phenomenology of imagination. Kiku no kaya, narani wa furuki potoketachi. Scent of chrysanthemums. In Nara, many ancient figures of Buddha. One of the first elements stressed by the discussants, especially Doi and Nishitani, more than everybody else, is a strange use of the plural suffix tachi to discuss Buddha sculptures. Doi is saying the plural of Buddha, hotoketachi, is surely possible when it comes to grammatical rules, but I still get a very peculiar impression from it. And Nishitani adds, by all means, I think that the tachi there is certainly some unique feeling that is tied to the Buddhas. So this kind of pluralization within a very small space of the hokku. And the remark becomes clearer once the group discusses about the way in which the plurality of sculpted Buddhas relates to Nara itself and to the perfume of chrysanthemums. These are some very long quotes, so please forgive me, but Nishitani is saying, I also think that here we have the sensation of breathing something eternal in the scent of chrysanthemums. In other words, within the perfume of chrysanthemums, we smell the perfume of the ancient Nara, of the ancient Buddhas therein. The scent of chrysanthemums is immediately one with the scent of eternity emanated from the capital of Nara and from the statues of Buddha. Or even better, the capital of Nara and the Buddhas before everything else felt a scent within the scent of chrysanthemums, one with the scent of the chrysanthemums. This is a key sensation. Kimochi. Here I think that the key part is important. Let's not conk up with kimochi. It's not joy, it's kimochi. At the same time, when we say scent or chrysanthemums, the scent is obviously the central element, but within that scent also comes hovering imagination. The flowers of chrysanthemums themselves. This might be extremely subjective, but what hovers in my mind are specifically yellow flowers of chrysanthemum. In other words, something that has the shape, katachi, of a chrysanthemum appears out of something formless that we can call the scent of chrysanthemums as enveloped by it. It is a kind of atmosphere, something atmospheric, that moreover becomes the origin of forms prior to forms themselves. Perhaps we can say that the chrysanthemum is something utterly real, and yet has within it a certain air image, kehai, that appears and disappears, flowing in a perfume that goes beyond reality. Anyways, the surreal, eternal thing in which the real thing appears and disappears, is a smell of chrysanthemum. In the case of the old Buddhas too, from the plural form of the name arises a particular atmospheric element that corresponds to the many Buddhas scattered in the temples. A lofty atmosphere that goes beyond the forms, an atmosphere that is eternal or religious. Within the atmosphere hovers the sugata, not the katachi, sugata, of the many Buddhas in different temples. The same applies for Nara as a city. To put it simply, in every case, something that has a form and something formless become one. Chrysanthemums, Nara, and the Buddhas are utterly real, but at the same time appear within an atmosphere that is not real, that is surreal, going beyond reality. Chorya Runafoods. And Doi, sorry for the very long quote, but I really find an interesting passage. Doi adds something. For Basho, as he enters Nara, the scent of chrysanthemums as a fragrance aura, as the perfume of chrysanthemums filling everything under the sky and remaining in his head as a memory, the scent of chrysanthemums that seems to be taking over the whole of the of autumn under the sky is something that floats in his thoughts. As we would expect as he arrives in Nara, wherever he looks there are Buddha statues, symbolizing the extremely long history that is unique to the old capital. To use a slightly philosophical expression, as Basho writes, Kiku no kaya, what floats in his memory is a speciality, kukansei, that encompasses the whole of Japan. And spreading over it, there's the long, long history of the old capital, surfacing as a relief. However, this is not simply historical time, but it rather permeates the whole city of Nara. So that in a certain sense, in the form of this expansion, everything is one. I think there is an incredible thickness in this expression. So this Kiku no Kaya is about memory, says Nishitani, and Doi confirms, yeah, this is the way I understand it. So apologies for the long quotes, I'm almost done. But I find the way Doi Nishitani approaches Hoku and his theme of permeation highly interesting. In the case of Nishitani, with a stress on the surreal, imaginary quality of perfume as image, a position that arguably already anticipates the philosophical core of Kutosoku. And in the case of Doi, dealing a bit more laboriously, like the fact that we're improvising this kind of analysis is like flabbergasting to me. But a bit more laboriously, with the mutual permission that occurs not only in space, but also through time. And it's not a chance that his 1974 work on Keigon philosophy is titled Eternity and Time. But this point did not escape Nishitani either, because he saw this identification between Fuekiruko and Mugen in the letter he said. But for both thinkers through perfume, and what other elements in our daily experience can be better said to be permeating and non-obstructive, we can feel how everything is one, as Doi said. Read from this angle, Basho's Autumn Hoku has not only some Proustian overtones, but seems to closely reproduce the structure of a memorable scene from the Vimalakirti Sutra, Yumai Kyo, a text that also had a good deal of importance in Hawaiian Buddhism, in which the Lehmann Vimalakirti can travel in a fantastic pure land made of pure perfume, like where a Buddha made of perfume is like teaching Buddhist law, like enlightening, without words, just by a permeation of perfume, like around like trees and flowers and the Buddha and this myriad of bodhisattvas. They're all communicating silently, like not even Ishin Denshin. It's really like just by permeating by perfume. This land is infinitely distant in time and space, and yet Vimalakirti travels there and comes back with an immense host of bodhisattvas with their 90 million line trends that miraculously fit in a tiny room and can be fed out of a single teacup. It is true that neither Nishitani nor Doi explicitly use the word muge in this passage, but I think it's fair to acknowledge how haikai allows them to recast this metaphysical background in a dimension of personal expression and experience that was not only closer chronologically and geographically closer than like Keigon, but also a direct implication in their own and in our own times. And I do not find politically neutral to discuss how memory and imagination can permeate space and produce an all-in-one insight and sensation at the very end of a disastrous war effort. To quote Tellenbach, the German psychiatrist who first started talking about atmospheres, there are atmospheres which cause people to form groups that bear witness to this atmosphere. In this way, there are common forms of life prior to all thought and speech. Through atmosphere, people recognize those that belong to their particular world. And indeed, throughout the 20th century, the idea of muge was mobilized in very different, even opposite political directions. Here I'm referring to an excellent article by Ishii in 2007, because it was presented as a guiding light for a Buddhist-inspired democracy, where like everybody could be like part of the same collective, non-obstructive social group. Before the war, by things like Tsuchida Kyosen, and trying to imagine a post-World War II order, Suzuki Daisetsu in 1946 asserted that human survival depended upon recovering the Buddhist perspective of the Keigon Kyo. Idutsu Toshiko, for instance, in the early 60s offered the Avatamsaka Sutra as the best possible example of Oriental wisdom during the Eranos conferences, or like also discussing Keigon in the community with Islamic mysticism, like Sufism in particular. Keigon thought and muge were equally important for thinkers of Japanese nationalism and imperialism on the right, such as Kametani Sekien, Kihira Tadayoshi. Ishii, probably way too uncharitably, includes Nishitani himself among the intellectuals who, I'm quoting, justified Japan's aggressive behavior through a combination of Hegel's philosophy of history, Ranke's historical view, and Keigon philosophy. I apologize in advance for the way in which different layers of discourse are mixed in this presentation, which not at all, I don't think it's enlightened and infusion of muge, just confusion. But let me finish by addressing three layers that I hope to further engage with each of them in the future through the lens also of Nishitani's text. So the first one is the historical, religious role Keigon in Japanese Buddhist, in Japanese thought, let's say, religious and maybe also artistic. The second one is the possibility of employing the metaphysical concept of, again, is it metaphysical, epistemological, phenomenological? We can argue about that. But to use that in a phenomenological sense, reflecting on permeation as a characteristic of imagination, atmosphere, and temporality. And then here, I mean, I dealt with mitate, visual tropes, Fuekiryuko, Kyojitsuron, irony as a problem. So it seems very fruitful. The third one, yes, I'm interested in the wide net of influence cast by Keigon Buddhism in the field of Japanese thought in 20th century. So my first idea was reading the whole of Suzuki, the whole of Doi, the whole of Idutsu, and coming here and making a comparison with Nishitani, and you realize how no, there was like absolutely a wild hope. But maybe in the next few months, I really hope to be able to like work on this like interest net, obviously, because everybody is reflecting each other's position, and at the same time a wider, much deeper like cultural and philosophical and spiritual background. So that, for instance, Nishitani is able to look at Basho and see the reflection of like the Keigon Kyo in his work. So it's not philological, but he has I find it like his effort to find the theme of permeation into haikai poetics works. Like as I was writing, like I thought, okay, no, it's a twist, it's very arbitrary. And then as I was translating again the quotes about Fuekiryuko or Kyojitsuron, I say, this is actually, it can be argued, maybe not historically, not in terms of lineage, but we can find the same problem of permeation throughout haikai. And that's really like it's a way of thinking time itself, thinking time and culture and influence in a very different way. So I think I'm done with time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Let's see if we can open to questions or comments for more or less 15 minutes, I think. Okay, see you.
Thanks. Hello there. And I like the quotes.
Well, they are.
I just had It's actually just a question you mentioned at the beginning, quote from John. The John 3.
Oh yeah. Like the wind flows where it wants.
Yeah,
That's how people from the spirit. Yeah,
Okay.
Nishitani is quoting it.
Is he quoting
Yes, in an essay about Basho. So yeah, he's really making a whole comparison with like Christian Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost being actual wind by the time of John and the original idea of Christianity, and how this atmospheric like maddening wind, of course, in Basho, we have like notions like Fukyo, wind madness, that is highly represented both in Basho and like in Chinese sources. We have EQ discussing about that. So yeah, he's making a comparison between, let's say, these Christian atmospherics of the spirit and what happens in a stage. I think like Professor Hawashi can confirm that, but I think the Basho Nyokel Kyo, like madness in Basho, is translated in German as well.
So Hashi, oh, it's gone. Microphone is on, but anyway.
It's not there.
Oh, yeah, so,
Yeah.
so can I ask a question?
Wait a moment, just to confirm, Professor Hashi, can you hear us?
Could you please repeat once more your question? I
think
have come a little too late. I had thought that the lecture of the afternoon begins at 4 o'clock. That was a misunderstanding.
it's okay.
Okay. The question was very simple.
I quoted the 1948 essay 場所における今日。
Yes.
論文と言及してでもってなると、ドイツ語での翻訳もあるんでしょうね。ファーシー先生のってなると、ファーシー先生のドローン文書にあると思います。
その先生、ドイツ語に翻訳なさったんですかというのがご質問。
ちょっと今それを意識を思い出しているところなんですけれど。
It can be. Okay, that's fine. Let's bibliography. Sorry.
As I have published a little too many things.
Edited by Professor Wash.
Only one remark. I remember that I have written somewhere that the word kyo in German and is to be translated with the German word Verrücktheit.
Yes.
And not wahnsinnig. And this word Verrücktheit means that something is verrückt from normal standard. And this Verrücktheit in Buddhism is kyo, and kyo is compared also with the Platonic idea of Verrücktheit. He has Plato has mentioned 4 sorts of Verrücktheit. And I have thought that Nishitani's idea of the Verrücktheit could be regarded as the 5th meaning of Verrücktheit. But that was my vague remembrance. So I'm not sure if I could contribute with this answer to your lecture. I have missed to listen to you on the whole. Sorry.
Maybe his comment could be related to the distinction between mad and insane in English, right? So verrückt und
they're all very interesting. They're all very interesting etymologies. I mean, mad is English and comes from mood and comes from eventually moon. So it's like lunatic. But like insane is to be like unhealthy. Like an insulating one. And cure has a really wonderful, I mean, it's not the main, maybe it's not the one thing, but it's partly like madness is also important because like we're dealing with imagination and religion. It's really like another like transparent wall between them, like how close the seeing things, hearing things. It's part of a religious mystical experience, but also like in a society that has no magic and like progressively less religion, we only have left madness. I'm a big fan of Ernesto de Martino and his work on magic. I think it's very close to some of the Nishitani's insights. But the Kyo, the character, it's actually just a dog getting very excited. So it's also being moved by something.
The maniac, for example.
Yes. So like the Greek mania probably is also a very close example.
The Greek mania for Plato is also at the base of philosophy, not only of religion.
And yet he's already distinguishing between two kinds of mania, one.
Three or four.
Yeah, so like it's like the kind of ambiguity, I mean, cannot be, because in a way, yes, he's already, when Socrates, like even the voice, like hearing a voice is something like that is already daimonian. Like he would go to a psychiatrist, but he's saying, oh, like there's a voice talking to me.
Yes, but this is the man that going to this. From the modern time, as people stress, you go to the hospital, but
this is a
late.
And nowadays in Japan, mania would have yet another meaning, right? When you say mania here in Japan, it would have yet another meaning, right? Not necessarily negative, right? Because you are what did we eat today? Soba. Soba mania,
it also has a very important sense like people like it's a craze and such a collective. Again, it's something that has to do how people relate and behave together. But yeah, I mean, let's say it's one more thing that kind of belongs to the religion, imagination.
The distinction between religion, philosophy, it's not so. But one Professor Tagire has a question.
Yeah, well, there's a problem I found in the text of Nishitani, which seems to be very related to something in your presentation too, because he's shifting from Riji Muge to Jiji Muge, and then he said finally related to this, I'm going to discuss fundamental imagination. And to me, that shift is very abrupt. It makes little sense to me. And how do you? So imagination is supposed to be a free kind of thought, some kind of liberty of thought. And then your model of the Kegon interpenetration of mirrors, that doesn't allow any change actually. It's reflecting each other, but there's no room for change. Then how does it? It's very common to say Kegon is a totalistic view, but it allows freedom. How is it possible? That's my question.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is also a question with multiple layers because I don't have the confidence to like answer you within the context of like Kegon Kyo doctrine. Like as I approached that, I realized well, it's a really huge corpus. So I did read as much. I read as much as I could into it, but I still feel like it's a Himalaya. And on the other, yes, how it's an abrupt shift in Nishitani. I agree. I think that in a way, when he's switching to fundamental, like kompontegina kosoryoku, rather than like keeping oscillating between Rijimuge and Jijimuge. So I think that somehow like he's making the main point as he's discussing the two of them, and then he moves away without really exploring this difference. So that's part of it. So for instance, we saw how they were discussing time. So he's using Muge to discuss like the way in which like shifting movement and like a kind of fundamental stillness, like the Suja, and also part of the behind, let's say the metaphysical background of Furuike Yaka It's like you have like the ancient life, something like ancient is like kind of like detemporalized by that. You have stillness, and then you have an instantary moment, and the two things are really like coming into each other. Let's say having a different perspective. So like the let's say Rigi, how to say, the thing that they interpenetrate doesn't mean there's no change. There's no change because change happens on the level of phenomena. Because change happens on the level of phenomena. It's phenomenon. So like we live through that. I mean, it's saying basically Brian Van Orden is arguing how like, from the Shun, so like Ri and G becomes to be employed like so like the Hawaiian in China begins employing this like G is corresponding to Shiki and Ri is used to like as a kind of correspondent to Ku. So that like basically Rijimuge and Jijimuge are like a very different way. Like it does change. The change in expression changes also some of the insight. But basically the Usoku Shiki the Ku and like Rijimuge are kind of the same position of non-duality. And so like by saying that they are soku, I'm not denying the fact that phenomenon has to be temporal, has to be changing. And like there's a shift in, but that's the point. Like you touched a really important thing. So the problem is that in Kegon, also Brian Van Orden is stressing that. So in Kegon, you have these wonderful, like metaphysical, psychedelic moments in which, like, okay, Indra's net, or like you have like the strong bodhisattvas all appearing, and that's all. So like it's a very theoretical position. And that's maybe why even in China, from one point, I mean, like the how to say, the metaphysical grammar of Hawaiian or Kegon or Tamsaka becomes very important in Chan and Zen tradition. So like that's also the position of Idutsu and Suzuki Daisetsu. They think that Zen is kind of the actual heir to like, so Kegon died within Japanese culture. So it's not really a ritually alive. Actually, like Nara still has something that's really interesting for me, like the Basho Hoku when he's dealing with Nara is actually Kegon and Tendai books. These titles come from the Kegon Kyo tradition. But when it comes to, so Zen is trying to, in a different way, in a non-textual way, through experience, to realize the kind of permutation, like all is one, the whole in the everything in one and one in everything, but has to be accomplished in a different way. And then that can be done through, like, can be like meditation, shouting, beating each other, EQ tried having sex to realize the kind of non-duality. So it has to be done in a certain way. Maybe that's why Nishitani is interested in offering poetic examples. I would say it's much easier to like create a point. But that's the main ambiguity. So he's using Muge to talk about imagination, not a major theme in Kegon Kyo. They're not interested in. So they're using lots of images, like even the main example, like Indra's net or like Fazang's lion. They are. It looks like a lion, but it's not really a lion. It's gold. This is the problem of images, and that's something that could be discussed by Plato. But so, like the kind of ambiguity of the ambiguous status of images is already part of, like, very strong part of Buddhism. But as is discussed in the Basho, Nishitani can do that in daily life. He can take from whatever kind of tradition without being limited to the very complex.
Actually, he's not referring to Kegon here, right?
I think he's using multiple times the Muge, but
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken, he never says Kegon.
Kegon, right?
He's quoting Kegon in the first Basho essay, Basho Nitsude from 68. And then again, no, he's using Jizai as well, which is like a very strongly Kegon. It's a term from really wonderful. I find it hard to translate. I said I'm bound, but it's not
Bound, I think it's quite strange to translate.
But it's like Jizai. It's also, and it's interesting also a way that we could say perfumes are Jizai. It's something that doesn't really need to stand on anything. So let's say freely floating.
I look to the ideograms.
Zai.
And what is Zai? This is
Yeah.
you can answer.
Yeah. But yeah, I was not happy with Unbound, but
No,
I'm
I'm
gonna discuss it.
literally for me wrong.
But in the sense of to be bound.
Yes, but where do you find bound in
Zai, if I'm living in a place, I'm out of the place, like I'm next to an earth thing. And it's not good. It's not good, but it's a beginning. Sorry, but no. So Nishitani is really using a lot of Kegon thought. I would say it's not just saying Muge. Like when he's dealing with permeation, he's taking from that tradition, but he's also using that in an original way. And I would say the fact that he's connecting it to Basho is his original list.
So when you say I'm studying Nishitani from the perspective of Kegon. Am I?
No,
Oh, yeah.
no, I'm trying to see how comes that he's using archaeology. Because I don't know enough about the perspective of Kegon. It's incredibly.
Because your slide, you said that you're gonna study Kegon as.
That's something I feel that comparing to the, let's say, it's relatively, of course, there's lots of scholarship. I mean, Buddhology and religious studies are a thing. But like comparing to the huge attention that has been paid to like Zen and Japanese philosophy in 20th century, I feel that the idea that and often like even Nishitani and in the Kyoto school and Zen, so like the fact that he was like kind of also he's like introducing a very different notion, and it's so central. I mean from 45 to 52. Like I would say from graduate school up to then. So like he was really interested in that. And again, like there's no I don't think there's any published trace of the seminar they were having that Ishii is mentioning. I tried to look for stuff specifically about Kegon on Nishitani, Sosaku. I didn't find anything at the level of titles, at least. So again, I would be surprised if there is really nothing. But he never actually writes such a big piece about Greco.
When Nishitani is actually saying the Jijimuge no. So when we talk about Jijimuge, we have to talk about imagination. So I'm going to discuss imagination in detail, but he never clarified the relationship between Jijimuge and imagination.
Because that they are a bit radical. Like I think he's like I think this ambiguity of like how Jijimuge has to be about imagination. So like really when I'm no, I don't. But when I use the example, I think the example of mitate, for me is really interesting. And before I would say metaphors, like we can use metaphors because everything can be. If I say, "Oh, he's a lion," I'm saying, "Oh, in that moment, it's like through that person, through the action of that person, through the koto, I'm seeing another koto." The thing is that, like, by the way language works, there's kind of like global metaphoricity. Like everything can become the metaphor for everything. So, like, from a standpoint of like linguistic, like again, it has to be a linguistic standpoint, but poetic. So, like, if language has this possibility, if our way of looking at things can produce other stuff, this imaginary expansion, we have it, and this is phenomenology. I don't think the historical position of Kegon is phenomenological.
And also, do you translate Jijimuge to principle, phenomena, interpenetration? Is the principle?
Non-obstruction.
Non-obstruction. But my question is the principle?
I would say that usually used as principle. Yes.
Is a principle? What kind of principle?
No, but that's the point. I mean, we could say re.
Or does it more mean reason?
No, it's like again, like as Brian Van Orden argued, like kind of Lee is really like another way of saying like a transcendent reality understood in terms of emptiness.
Well, logos.
No, I wouldn't translate Lee as logos. I mean, in the confusion sense, maybe, but like not in the context of
it can be understood as logos, right?
Yes. But in the new confusion context, maybe. Yeah. But here it's really like I like the way in which Brian, like, I think like Van Orden makes it very understandable to say, okay, this is the standpoint of emptiness in the end. So that's, for instance, that's why you have Jijimuge, but like, as though he's arguing at the beginning of it, you don't have Ririmuge.
Yeah,
because the principle is one. It's like that transcendence of like everything. So the whole of the net doesn't need to be in a state of interfusion with the net. The net is the net. The kind of totality.
Sound as contradiction, right? If you have B, something like this.
Because you don't have, of course, in a way, of course, it's in a state of interpretation with itself because it's a completely transcendent, completely transcendent. So usually it's translated as principle. It's also used in a very different way in New Confucianism, and then the couple becomes not G and D, but like Ki and D. Principle is the standard translation, so I don't see the problem Of course, not as logos, not as a transcendent idea, not as a we were talking yesterday about the kind of like ethical principle. No, it's not. I understand the context.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lorenzo. We have to move to Francesca because it's 4 o'clock in Japan. Cool. So the second speaker is Francesca Greco
And culture.
from Hildesheim.
Things like
Francesca, can you introduce you very briefly?
sky, wind, spirit,
And then do you need to share
Yeah,
the
hello.
screen?
originally
Hello?
the separation of those two things.
I cannot understand really well. Could you repeat, or did you ask me something?
Yes, the two things. First is if you want to share the screen, I think you should be able to do it. No, of that experience, but it's up
I
to
don't
you.
need it. Thanks.
And
Thanks.
secondly, there was a request to make a brief self-introduction.
Who knows where from?
Your name, where do you come from, and then you can start.
It's like the spirit.
Okay. Yeah. Welcome everybody. Good morning from Germany. My name is Francesca Greco. I come originally from Italy, but I'm doing my PhD in Hildesheim, a small city in Germany, and my PhD is about negativity and relationality. And I took inspiration from Japanese philosophy. And beside that, I also work at the university here in a project which will end next March on the histories of philosophy in a global perspective. So also this part plays a little bit a role in my thinking. So that was the presentation of myself. And for today, I decided, like last time, to bring you more questions than answers. So since this is a workshop, I thought to share with you some of my questions that I hope we can discuss together. I will base my thoughts on the German translation of Kutosoku, and I will focus myself more on the second and on the third paragraph of the paper. So I found really fascinating that for Nishitani, poetry seems to play an essential role in manifesting or explaining what is emptiness. And what was interesting to me is that he used other particles, other words, Japanese words, to point at the kind of emptiness or a kind of empty connection between words, between thoughts, between language and reality. And he does it on the following the example of the first 3 sentences of Kasen. And for example, he focuses attention on this cut words, this Keiji, like no and te. And that was really interesting for me, because I thought like in a European context, maybe the person would like to explain the function of soku, for example. So it seems that these words plays the role of a soku logic or a soku connection, but without using the term soku. And using other words, other connections. So I would like to make a parallel with the function of the negation. The negation can also have a similar function to connect and to cut this connection, or to cut the words in order to make a connection, to relate this other words. And yeah, my thoughts on negation in this moment are like, I follow Paolo Virno, and he's an Italian philosopher, describing negation on at least two levels. There is determined negation. That's the negation we use every day in the language. For example, if I say it's not cold, I am focusing on the coldness, on the fact this is cold, but I cut this coldness, so I cut it away, or I delete in some way this coldness. So I need the coldness, I need this something in order to cut, to like destroy the coldness, in order to express what I want to express. That means that it's not cold, which is different, obviously, to say that it is hot. So my thought has also a background on duality and non-duality, but I would not address this directly. So, and in what okay, sorry. And another level of the negation in the thinking of Paolo Virno is an endemic one. He calls that, and he says that the determined negation, so the negation we use in the language, it's like a sign, a small sign of much bigger negation or negativity. He speaks about negativity, negatività, and he doesn't come to speak of nothingness, which is also interesting for me, but he speaks about negativity. And so this other level of negation he calls, or negativity, he calls an ontological negation, which obviously connects negation with being. And maybe also for this reason he's not speaking about the nothingness, because he would be he would go probably more in the direction of a non-beingness non-beingness, more than in the direction of nothingness. So, but it stops there. He speaks about negativity, so a determined negativity and an ontological negativity. Parallel to Nishitani, or someone wants to enter the room?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think I also could do this. So the interesting part for me of this two paragraph of Nishitani's Kutosoku is that Nishitani doesn't use the negation to make this to express this relational cut, this connecting cut, and he is also not using the term soku, so it's not yet quoting, for example, the Heart Sutra with the famous phrase connecting emptiness and forms through the term soku. So he's not using the term soku to express this relational cut, but instead other small words like no and te and so on. I think this is a genial move because in this way he avoids to fall in a kind of duality which can easily arise when we connect something that more than different is opposite. which can be being and not being, hot and cold. And unlike this, Nishitani is here connecting two similarities, something that is similar, like the solitude. Sorry, I have the German translation here, Einsamkeit, and the falling of the snow, das Fallen des Schneeregens, des rain, snow. The connection of something similar allows us, to not fall in such duality, and to open much more the function, or also the field of application, or the field of recognition of this relational cut that is expressed here by these small words like no and te. That means that prepares the further step Nishitani wants to take, which is to go from the connection, the non-opposition of or non-hindrance of Ri and Ji, and go to the next step, which is the hindrance of G and G, so the similarity. Unless this, I was asking myself, when happened something like that? When happens this cut, this relational cut? When I am cutting, or Nishitani is seeing this cut in this kasen, for example. So it is clear this is in the small words no or te, and so, or at the end, but it's not so clear like the position of the negation. So the position of the cut is in the betweenness, or is this cut actual also one element of this relation, because the words no and te and are part of the poetry here, and happens in the negation. The negation is part of the word. Obviously we can use negation in different way. There are negations which are insert in one word, like unconditioned. It's the same word. And there are negation which is used with verb or with adjectives that are not the insert in the word. So are we here speaking about only the connection between two or many realities, or G, two or many elements of reality, or are we speaking about this very connection? And this would be the case because Nishitani is not using the term soku in the, or not searching for an example where the term soku is appearing effectively in the sentence he wants to analyze, like it could be in the Earth Sutra. This position of the cut of the soku would change the reality or the phenomena we are describing, so it would change in the sense that I really don't even need the opposition to describe this this cutting activity, of the soku, this cutting activity of the emptiness itself. In this sense, it's like a grammar of emptiness. I can do a small example through one practice that I know, which is Aikido. In Aikido, it is used also the term cutting, or really the gesture of cutting with the image of you having a sword in your hands. And this gesture is used to when addressed as cut, actual cut, is used like to like throw away your partner far away from you in order to protect yourself. And you do it with a kind of connection, because obviously if you are not connected, you cannot cut. The knife, for example, that cut flesh needs to touch the flesh to cut. So this is the idea. But here the question, so this only this moment the cut, or this cutting already started when I connected with my partner. So much before that I am performing this gesture of cutting, like if I had a sword in my hand. And if we take the whole gesture of cutting, and also the moment of connection, the very first moment of connection, also the search for connection in order to move and influenciate the partner. If we take this also as cut, I am free from a duality between me and my partners. So we are really connected, but in an almost antagonistic way, because the scope, it's to stay in a safe distance, a safe so that I'm not in danger, and also my partner is not in danger. Or is this cut like the moment in which we really separate? So I cut and my partner will roll away and I will try to stay stable in my position. So that was an example from the Aikido. And a last question, maybe my question about the positionality of this soku, which is different than in relation to the position of negation, would open a question about hierarchies, which is really important to me. Also in the Hinsicht, also in regarding my work in the project of in a global perspectives of philosophy in a global perspective, about hierarchies. So depending on the position of this cut, we have different hierarchies, different relations between the elements in play. I can exemplify this this kind of hierarchy by asking if why is Nishitani choosing poetry in this case to show the function and the role of this relational cut or cutting. Has poetry an hierarchical higher status than other kind of languages, which it's like it sounds in his paper? And if so, what is about this order that will be established through this hierarchization of practices like writing poetry or maybe doing Aikido instead of writing scientific essays in philosophy or doing other practices that is not Aikido. Would be this kind of order or this kind of spoke about structure, this kind of structure. Yes, a hierarchical one where one element has more power than other, has more power to show how the reality is really in itself or not. And which are the consequences if it's so, and which are the consequences if it's not so. Like it could be in the example of this one poem, which is trying to connect sameness and not opposition, doing then putting this opposition in a hierarchical relation, where the positive has always more power and more presence than the negative or the negativity. So, thank you.
So, Steve, please.
Thank you. Lots of questions. I'm just wondering, in your example, in Hokkaido, you do the cut, but in any one point, one cut it's not a bi-directional structure. It doesn't, it's one side doing the cutting or the other side doing the cutting, or you would have two cuts at the same time. But I'm wondering do you think that maybe the difference is that in the cut words, the cut creates both sides at once, rather than there's two sides already existing and cutting away at each other. So I'm wondering if that might interfere with the metaphor that you're working with.
Yeah, nice question. Wow, thanks. Yeah, it's a really important question. So, in Aikido, there is always the idea that, or maybe in general in martial arts, there is always the idea that the tori, so the one who is doing the technique, is the leading one or the winner. And it's not so underlined that actually the role of uke is probably much important. So uke is the person who will go on the ground or roll away in Aikido, or being death in Iaido probably. And this role is as important as the tori, or sometimes more important, because if the uke doesn't have the context, one say the context, or sometimes in Japanese I heard the word atari. So it's like trying to catch, to connect, to build a relation with tori. Uke cannot defend himself or herself. So this kind of attack that uke makes, and it's like a cut. The uke is trying to cut because it's attacking you, and in trying to maintain the contact, atari, putting you in atari, trying to maintain the contact is a try to maintain this cutting activity. So I would say, from the perspective of what Nishitani is describing in his paper here, both parts, both sides are cutting, but one part is cutting in a more clear way because one part has a sword. But that doesn't mean that the other part is not cutting. So for this reason, for me, the parallel between the cutting activity of soku and the cutting activity of the negation, for example, uke is not cutting or not having a sword in the hands, not it's really interesting. Like it opened, and I think it opened a new word if we think that uke is also cutting, not only the tori, which could be bi-directional, even if one role seems to be much more clear, cutting. Doesn't make sense for you?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Questions? Obviously,
Thank you so much for your very inspiring question. So please allow me to give a very simple, small question. My question is, I was wondering what kind of role does what you call negation or cut play in the world of non hindrance of things, or jijimuge, the world of jijimuge. And because as we see in the text soku, so in this world, in the world of jijimuge, and the notion of non-circular reciprocity, in Japanese, fu ego, this notion is very, very significant. And this notion distinguishes the world of jijimuge from the world of rijimuge. So please, could you please tell me your idea about the role of cut or negation in this world, so in the world of jijimuge. So the principle of the main feature of which is non-circular reciprocity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's a really difficult one, actually.
Yes. I know that. So,
but
so
it's important.
I was asking myself.
It's a really important question. Also because this is maybe like the further step about what I was talking in my small presentation. It's also for this reason that I focuses also only in this two small paragraph, because then it is much complicated, obviously,
Yes.
with Digimoge. But really important question. So for me it is interesting that in the description of this non-hindrance of things between each other, we maintain, or this expression maintain a negation. So maintain one part, or maintain one tori, maintain one main part where our attention maybe is catched, the mu. So in a kind of way, one could say that addressing phenomena in the through the perspective of rijimuge or jijimuge, maintain a kind of cutting which is too visible, and like I'm searching for the word. It's like confusing us or catching all our attention without without letting our attention go to the phenomenon itself, to Gigi. It is in this sense that I ask myself, should we address this phenomena with this kind of language? It is also a cutting language. This atomisierend is translated like atomizing language, this language which order and which show here, point out. Or we should act like Nishitani tries in these two paragraphs to give the phenomena, to propose as one poetry in this case, but I ask myself if could be also Aikido or something else, and so avoiding the duality of the mu and u, but maybe, and this is another question, maybe it's a question for you, maybe I am too much in my own tradition, seeing in mu an opposition to u, for example, or seeing in mu simply a negation, a function of negation. This would be my question for you. I hope I could address a little bit your question.
Before Professor Hashi.
Also, please give me some time. Thank you.
Just one point, because you made Francesca, an example of Aikido. So what is the relation between I of Aikido and negation? So because this kind of negation produces an harmony. So what in particular, if you play Aikido or Kendo at the level of Jijimuge, there must be harmony there. So how can you interpret it or explain?
Thank you. This is also, sorry, the last sentence I
No,
didn't
if
hear.
you have something to based on your Aikido experience that you can use philosophically in this sense.
Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting because these questions comes when I try to analyze Aikido, not while I am doing Aikido. So this question is also related to the previous question of Abe Sensei. Yeah, this is harmony. There is harmony, obviously, in the context, or in English, one used the term contact, but for example, Yoko Okamoto used the term atari. And atari, it's a kind like of you are blocked. There is a kind of negation in this kind of block or attack. So the harmony, or also and now I don't remember the name of the Aikido master. I think Yamada Sensei. There is one famous Aikido master that says that we should bring back in harmony in Aikido, so that there is a will to control, there is a will to attack, a will to cut. And it is part of the harmony. So it's not an harmony like could be maybe in the Greek sense, but I don't want to essentialize Greek's tradition neither. So I would not translate I with harmony. This is a connection or a cut connection.
Thank you, Professor Ohashi, and after Lorenzo. Professor Ohashi, please.
So no.
Okay. Francesca, thank you very much for your presentation. At first, I would like to quote one word of Basho. He says, as in the former lecture, we have discussed a little about cut word. Now, and the word ya in the poem, Furuike ya, and that was the typical case of cut word. Now, Basho says that every 48 Japanese alphabets, Japanese alphabet contains 48 syllables or letters. Basho says all 48 syllables or letters are cut word. There are, of course, some typical kireji, typical cut words, but for Basho, every letter can be regarded or can be used as cut word. And with this word, with this quotation, I would like to say, you have given some examples of possible kire in Aikido. And I would say, this and this, and this action, tori, uke, atari, and so forth, are or could be regarded or interpreted as kire. I agree with you. And but at first, my comment or question, if you agree with me, you practice Aikido.
Yes. Yeah, sorry.
The practice as itself, the practice as a whole, is it not a typical kire, typical cutting? Because with the practice, somehow everyday life is cut to concentrate yourself into Aikido and to perhaps to go back again to everyday life. And practice. With this example, I would also say that in Buddhism, above all in Zen Buddhism, praxis is quite important and essential. But this practice in Zen Buddhism is at first going away from everyday life to concentrate himself into the practice in the temple, with which he abandons the everyday life, but to attain one state of mind, with this mind, he comes back again to the everyday life, and that was also a case of a mystic. And in the early period of mystic, German mystic, there were some people, mostly women, who have attained a kind of ecstasis, and they couldn't come back to the everyday life. In the middle stage of mystic, of the history of mystic, like Eckhart and so forth, they have attained an ecstasis. Without quitting this ecstasis, they could continue their everyday life, with which the everyday life changes somehow. And so practice has, so far as I see, also the meaning of cut. And you have many experiences of practice in Aikido, which my question, if you agree with this interpretation of cut in form of practice. And my second question, the calligraphy behind you, the dream, you have made by yourself this calligraphy. Dream, according to Zhuangzi, dream is a state in which he asks if he is in a state of dream or in a state of reality. And the dream can also mean a kind of cutting, but because a dream and reality are on the one hand combined with each other, dream as reality, or reality as dream, but still dream is dream and reality is reality. And this dream, state of dream could be, would you say could be regarded as ontological cutting? So these two questions. Perhaps you have asked if soku and cut is a negation or cut is not a negation, and so I would say cut as a negation. That could be said with basho. So cut the word cut or the matter cut has many dimensions, and all phenomena in our life could be understood as a kind of cut, so far as I see. And special forms of cutting could be found also in various forms of Aikido, but these various forms of cutting on the whole, namely the praxis, is as itself cutting. Would you agree, or do you have another opinion?
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and comments and thoughts. Actually, I could develop my question and my thoughts also because we had a wonderful seminar about 2 years ago about this text and other two small texts of Nishitani together with you here in Hildesheim. So thank you for helping me to develop these questions, and to thank you for the further questions you asked me. And yes, that's true. To practice Aikido is in itself also a cutting of the everyday life. Yeah. That's also like one difficult point, or one point where I usually discuss a lot with Rolf, because I would like to stay in the everyday life. So I would like to describe Aikido in the everyday life. So Aikido without swords and without clear roles. But it's difficult. In order to do it, it's interesting your question, because it's true. In order to do this, I need to cut my everyday life and only practice. And this can be like kind of falsification of the everyday life in order, but then to come back to this everyday life. So maybe also with Wittgenstein, I would say, like, there is always something. You can always go back and cut and cut and cut, or you can always discover a cut you didn't solve. You think it's everything one, but it is not. That comes back to my to the question of my presentation. If this kind of negation, then this kind of cut, or if this kind of cutting more similar to the negation, so a clear one that I have to stop reality or everyday life to practice this kind of negation, maybe it cannot be erased from the experience of another kind of cutting, which is a more relational one and non-dual one, which is the cutting of the soku, or the cutting of this cutting words, this kireiji, used by or addressed by Nishitani in this paragraph. So yeah, it seems, or your question brings to me to say that negation cannot be negated, cannot be eliminated, or this feeling of an analytical negation, like the stop of the everyday life, cannot be put it outside, and cannot be eliminated in order to come back to the everyday life with the feeling of Aikido. And obviously there could come much more questions about Aufhebung and stuff like that, but this is maybe for another for another discussion. And sorry,
Dream.
About the dream, I had to think. I am dreaming. About the dream, I had to think on Nietzsche, where he says that the dream is not different, or it has to be related to the reality, because otherwise the dream cannot be a dream if it's not like abgehoben, if it's not differentiate from the reality. So this is another really interesting relation, which a little bit hides the negation in it. So the dream is not a negation of the reality, because I am not putting the reality like upside down. I am dreaming something different. So it's the difference of the difference, and not the difference of the opposition. It's not dual. So how maybe Nietzsche is trying to display it, or how Nishitani is also addressing this relation between reality and dream in the context of the critique of nihilism. But this is also another context. I don't know. In this case, I would not say that the dream is a negation of the reality. Does it make sense for you, Sensei?
Tobias would help you. He raised the hand.
But maybe
yes, Lorenzo was first.
Lorenzo is
the first.
okay.
Hi, Francesca. So I was wondering, is negation then a kind of permeation, a kind of non-obstruction? An example from Nishitani. So he's talking like the feeling he's concentrating in Kotosoku is loneliness. And to be lonely is not just being alone. So I can be alone and completely fine with myself. To be lonely, I must feel and actually what Tsuji is making I think what Tsuji makes that argument in his ethics, in Ririgak, if I'm not mistaken. In order to be lonely, I have to feel my being alone as a negation of a fundamental connection with other people. So I'm connected. I'm very I will never feel my being part of a community, the fact that I'm not an individuum. I will never feel it as strongly as in a moment of loneliness. So I need to negate that in order to affirm that. And so do you ever feel lonely when you push away people doing Aikido? So I was wondering, so in that sense, we can understand negation itself as a kind of permeation. When I'm saying non-be, I'm framing suddenly something that's C by its connection, which is a negative connection to be. So isn't negation some kind of non-obstructive, unhindered way of connecting things? Seeing things as connected.
Yeah, wow. Really interesting question. I never felt lonely while I am throwing people through the room, through the dojo in Aikido. But maybe it's something that I should explore more. I have to think now to this other wonderful seminar we had here, but some years ago with Enrico. I cannot see Enrico right now. About Iaido, and how much in this seminar Enrico tried to make us understand the feeling of feeling sorry for killing the person I have to kill in Iaido. So sorry, this seminar was about Iaido, and he also performed some kata, and saying that it's not only about the forms I am doing, but it's also about this feeling, this kind of feeling is important. And I would throw the question also to Enrico: is this a loneliness? I remembered it was like sadness or being sorry for having to kill my best friend or my ghosts in Iaido. And I thought at this time that it would be typical of Iaido. And it was several years ago, so I was not so good. I am still not so good in Aikido, but now I understand a little bit more. And I never felt lonely or sad in Aikido, or in trying to cut people, like attacking, making atari with people as uke, or in cutting the connection, or cutting the play, the interplay with the partner, throwing the partner away, or doing the closing technique on the floor, on the ground. It's a really interesting question. Maybe I should explore more this feeling. Non-obstruction. The term non-obstruction is to me too strong and negative. So it presupposes too many steps that I have to do, and maybe I have to. Maybe I should like cut the everyday reality to focus on these steps and to fulfill these steps in the non-obstruction. So there is something, and this is defined, and there is something else, and this is defined, but they are also connected, and they are connected in this way that they are not obstructing each other because they are both empty. So there is a lot of logical thinking here I have to do in order to understand or to feel this non-obstruction. So really, in a spontaneous way, I would say in the analyze of the non-obstruction, there is too much negation for me that hinders, then that obstruct me to connect. It's too much distance, trying to avoid the idea that things are like isolated. But in the practice, maybe in what Nishitani is trying to do with poetry, not only writing poetry, maybe also reading poetry, feeling poetry, like feeling the loneliness in Aikido. This would be something else. Much less negating, and and more like performing, or Nishitani is using also this word Vergegenwärtigung, or presentification, like presentifying this kind of emptiness, which is not the second element of a relation, like form, same emptiness, but it's in the middle. It's the soku. Yeah, that would be. I think that would be the case. Yes, yes, but I have to practice more.
So thank you very much, Francesca. I think it's time we will go to the last presentation. We could continue to speak about Aikido and the Aido for hours. It's better to move.
May I just quickly?
Yes.
Go on, because I would really like to get this in. So because the discussion was much about the cut and the cutting as soku. But the way I understood the discussion was that cutting functions as a kind of separation and joining and this interplay, which is, I think, very much captured by what Nishitani describes as this revolvingly reciprocal relation in the English translation of Marra. So this egoteki kanke. But I wonder if there's not also a dimension to the cut, to the operation of cutting that goes beyond the spatial creation of an interval. In the sense that I wonder in your discussion also of negativity, how much is cutting or the negative connected to a moment of loss, of something that is irretrievably gone, that has to be cut off and as a necessary loss to reach a certain new experience. And this is for me something that is at play, especially in Nishitani's discussion of that poem, where in the English translation again, the bottom of loneliness falls off and it keeps falling. And in another poem that he cites, he speaks of winter loneliness excelling. There's a kind of exuberance. There's an excellent loneliness, an excess of loneliness. What is this excess? What is this continuous falling off? That seems to me a dimension to this negativity that might connect to a kind of cutting off that is not reducible to a back and forth of separation and joining or going and coming back again, but rather something that has to be let go forever. How much does this play into your? This is what I wanted to ask, but maybe this is another.
Yeah, really, thank you for this question. I'm sorry for the time, but really thank you for this question because it's a really important one. And this excess, this too much, it has to be there. The excess plays a fundamental role in my understanding of negativity. I can say also for Paolo Virno, there is an important role of the excess which cannot delving with now, and the loss is important because it's an emotional excess. And if this is true, then I was then it much more it is needed, for example, in the practice of Aikido, to bring the harm back into the harmony, so to underline this excess. And then Aikido has definitely a lot to okay, how can I say it? Like to search for an example in Iaido, in this really feeling of unbearable or something that cannot be avoided. And this, in the practice of Aikido, this is much less dramatic, let's say, than, for example, in the Iaido. And this drama maybe is what we need. And then it could be interesting, like to look at not only in poetry, but maybe actually in drama, like, for example, in No theater or in Greek tragedy. or in a contemporary experience, in everyday experience of excess of drama. That could be also a really interesting field for me, like the feelings in the everydayness when they come to an excess, because they come to an excess. So thank you for this question. Really important. I had to add it in in my next presentation about this topic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, if you agree, we can go to the last talk that will be in German. And Robert Lehmann is the speaker. Can you introduce yourself very briefly in English so that the people...
Yes, of course. My name is Robert Lehmann. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Hildesheim at the moment, working on a phenomenology of the impersonal. And I will indeed speak in German, as far as I understand I'm supposed to do, and I'm not supposed to speak longer than 20 minutes. And I think I will meet both conditions. There is a German version and a pretty rough English translation around. So I think everyone who wants to follow the train of thought is able to do so. Shall I show the text as well, or are you...
It's better if you share the screen and show the text that you want to read, so that not everyone has your PDF, so better.
Okay, can you make me a host then?
Yes, of course. I thought that I have already done, but probably pause. Wait a moment. It would be possible to...
So, did that work?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right, so I will talk about the border problem, so to speak, in Nishitani's Soku, and I will do so in German, and I will switch now, and then for discussion, of course, we can switch back and forth to the languages we speak. So the title I gave the little impulse is Mitteilen und Teilhaben zum Problem der Grenze in Nishitanis Soku. Von Kants erster Kritik bis zum Traktatus Wittgensteins spielt das Problem der Grenze eine zentrale Rolle innerhalb moderner Philosophie. Die Grenzziehung des Geistes, die Bestimmung also seiner äußersten Vermögen und die entsprechend kultivierte Einhegung seiner zum Teil überschwänglichen Neigungen gehören zum Grundbedürfnis aufklärerischer Philosophie. Verspricht diese Grenzziehung doch nicht nur der Philosophie, den sicheren Gang einer Wissenschaft zu geben und gegebenenfalls dem Glauben Platz zu machen, sondern auch vor den metaphysischen und theologischen Autoritäten zu bewahren, die die westliche Philosophie so lange in ihren Bann geschlagen haben. Die Lust an der Grenzziehung geht aber bekanntermaßen einher mit einem tiefen Unbehagen. Wie wohl als erster Hegel mit aller Schärfe gesehen hat, gehört zu jeder Grenze hinzu, was jenseits von ihr liegt. Dem Denken eine Grenze ziehen und diese Grenze denken wollen, heißt also immer auch das grenzenlose Denken. Wittgenstein wird aus dieser Einsicht den Schluss ziehen, dass das Projekt des Traktatus nicht darin liegen kann, dem Denken eine Grenze zu ziehen, denn das hieße, etwas zu denken, das sich nicht denken lässt, sondern dem Ausdruck der Gedanken, das heißt der Sprache. In der Tradition des Zens wiederum ist uns in diesem Zusammenhang eine Forderung überliefert, die wir bei Yao Shan Wei Zhan und durch ihn bei Dogen finden. Wie denken wir, was sich nicht denken lässt? Fragt hier ein Schüler. Nicht denken. Ishiryu, antwortet der Meister. In den kommenden Minuten möchte ich von dem Gedanken ausgehen, dass wir in Nishitanis Soku der Entfaltung eines Denkens beiwohnen, das sich von der paradoxen Spannung der Grenzziehung leiten lässt und sich dabei sowohl auf den Ausdruck der Gedanken, also die Sprache, als auch auf jeden Grund bezieht, in dem Denken und Nichtdenken einander hervorbringen. Die Grenze, die hier hervortritt, ist die Grenze von Poesie und Religion. Und beide, Poesie und Religion, eint, dass Denken in ihnen zugrunde geht und von diesem Grund her zu neuem Ausdruck drängt. Struktur der Grenze. In Nishitanis Text finden wir etwas, das man einen gesunden Aristotelismus nennen könnte. Die Welt ist in Ordnung. Die Wirklichkeit ist durchherrscht von einem Prinzip, von einem der Wirklichkeit von Anfang an innewohnenden Logos. Und es ist kaum übertrieben, die Aufgabe der Philosophie darin zu sehen, sich mit der Wirklichkeit als solcher vertraut zu machen. In weiten Teilen der abendländischen Philosophie bedeutet dies allerdings, die Ordnung der Wirklichkeit zu erkennen und allgemein verbindlich zur Darstellung zu bringen, das heißt vermittels mehr oder weniger kohärenter begrifflicher Architekturen in Sprache zu überführen. Das Problem der Grenze im Allgemeinen und das Problem der Grenze des Denkens im Besonderen kommt nun zum Vorschein, wenn man mit Nishitani in diesem Zusammenhang eine Frage stellt. Können wir, fragt er, wenn wir diese Ordnung der Wirklichkeit, ihren Logos, bis auf seinen Grund hin durchforschen, zu dem Punkt gelangen, wo überhaupt keine Diskrepanz mehr zwischen Logos und Sache besteht. Das heißt, bis zu der Stelle oder dem Ort, wo sich beide vollkommen entsprechen. An diesem Ort stünden sich also Logos und Wirklichkeit nicht mehr in einem Verhältnis von Ordnung und Geordneten gegenüber, sondern der Logos hätte sich hier so in die Wirklichkeit zurückgezogen, dass die Dinge als sie selbst hervortreten. Dieser Ort lässt sich zwar nicht mehr zur Darstellung bringen, denn er wäre die Bedingung jeder verbindlichen Darstellung, aber er lässt sich sehr wohl in Sprache überführen. Das heißt, er kann zum Ausdruck gebracht werden. Und dies ist Aufgabe der Poesie. Wenn sie gelingt, begegnet uns in ihr zunächst das, was Nishitani die ungehinderte Durchdringung von Logos und Sache, Rijimuge, nennt. Grenzen der Dinge. Die Welt ist in Ordnung. Das bedeutet, dass im Gefüge der Welt Einzelnes vorkommt. Dinge, die sind, was sie sind, weil sie alle anderen Dinge nicht sind. Alle Dinge zeichnet in diesem Sinne eine absolute Selbstgenügsamkeit aus. Sie sind abgeschlossene in sich selbst. Aber dass die Welt in Ordnung ist, bedeutet eben auch, dass alle Dinge eine Grenze haben, in der sie sind, was sie sind. Und nun gehört notwendig zu einer Grenze hinzu, dass sie wechselwendig ist. Was das eine begrenzt, begrenzt auch das, was dahinter liegen mag. Nishitanis Bild zweier anliegender Räume macht die beiden Strukturmomente der Grenze deutlich. Vereinzelung einerseits, Verbindung andererseits. Dass die Welt in Ordnung ist, besagt, dass der Logos, der sie durchherrscht, die verschiedenen Dinge als sie selbst hervortreten lässt und sie selbst sein lässt. Das meint in der Metaphorik Nishitanis nichts anderes als die allseitige Einteilung durch Trennwände in einer unendlichen Mannigfaltigkeit von Räumen. Doch Nishitanis Bild lädt, denke ich, nicht zu einer überstürzten Überwindung der trennenden Momente der Grenze ein. Er sieht vielmehr genauer hin auf das Verbindende der Grenze, die gegenseitige Durchdringung. Hier zeigt sich aber eine Schwierigkeit, denn das Bild der angrenzenden Räume dient der Anschauung von etwas, das sich nicht in der Weise zeigt, wie es das Bild suggeriert. In Nishitanis Metapher blicken wir in Distanz zunächst auf die Räume. Und so verfügen wir bereits nicht nur über die Grenzen, sondern gewissermaßen auch über ihre Verbindungen. In die Verlegenheit, wie man von einem Raum in den anderen gelangen kann, beziehungsweise wie sich ihre Durchdringung tatsächlich vollzieht, müssen wir von dieser Metapher her so nicht geraten. Und das ist zunächst nicht verwunderlich, denn zur strukturellen Bestimmung der Grenze der Dinge und ihrer wechselseitigen Durchdringung bedient sich Nishitani, wie er selbst indirekt einräumt, zunächst der Sphäre des Logos, der tragenden Struktur, die ihren Ausdruck in der objektivierenden Sprache der Wissenschaft und dem philosophischen Denken findet. Die Dinge selbst bleiben hier im Grunde unberücksichtigt. Und für die Bestimmung der Wechselwendigkeit der Grenze ist dieser Zugriff tatsächlich unerlässlich. Denn er ermöglicht es darzustellen, was es heißt, dass sich Raum A, da wo er eine Grenze mit Raum B teilt, in B spiegelt. Und dadurch A in B nicht etwa als A erscheint, sondern als genuiner Teil von B. Diese wechselseitige Übermittlung bringt Nishitani mit zwei deutschen Worten zum Ausdruck: mitteilen und teilhaben. A teilt sich selbst in B in der Gestalt von B mit. Das heißt, A bringt sich in B als B zum Ausdruck und B hat Anteil an A in der Gestalt von B. Dem gesamten Wortfeld, das diese beiden Worte gemeinsam aufspannen, im Einzelnen nachzudenken, kann heute nicht meine Aufgabe sein. Ich begnüge mich in der Tat sogar damit, es zum Teil aufzurufen. Neben einer offenkundig meriologischen Bestimmung, der Frage also nach Teil und Ganzen, der Logik des Ortes und Anklängen an die Metexis-Metaphysik Platons, scheint mir der entscheidende Aspekt dieses Wortfeldes eine Ästhetik des Ausdrucks zu sein. Schon durch das kommunikative Element der Mitteilung und die intime Vermittlung der Teilhabe ist hier, denke ich, ein performatives Moment angesprochen, das das Problem der Grenze bereits in seiner logischen Form auf ihr poetisches Potenzial hin entgrenzt. Was Nishitani uns mit dem Bild der angrenzenden Räume zunächst anbietet, ist ein Standpunkt, der es ja in der Tat erlaubt, die absolute Selbstständigkeit der Dinge und ihre wesentliche Unterschiedenheit und Selbstständigkeit sowie ihre absolute Beziehung und ihre wesentliche Nichtunterschiedenheit zugleich zu sehen. Aber das zugleich, das sich in der objektivierenden Vogelperspektive des wissenschaftlichen Logos zeigt, ist in einem gewissen Sinne trivial, denn dieser Blick auf die Grenze erlaubt eben genau zwei Dinge nicht: Teilhabe und Mitteilung. Anders verhält es sich aber mit der Grenze, die in der Sprache der Poesie aufscheint. Die diskontinuierliche Kontinuität der Poesie, die den Gang und die Übergänge rationaler Darstellung auf der Ebene des Ausdrucks durchbricht, schöpft aus dem Grund, in dem sich A tatsächlich in B mitteilt. Poesie. In Bashus Gedicht etwa sind wir in der Tat mit zwei Wirklichkeiten konfrontiert: der abgrundtiefen Einsamkeit und dem fallenden Schneeregen, die in propositionaler Rekonstruktion als Inhalt von zwei Sätzen wiedergegeben werden müssen. Im Gedicht selbst bilden sie eine Einheit, und zwar dadurch, dass sie sich eine Grenze teilen. Sprachlich verortet Nishitani den syntaktischen wie semantischen Kipppunkt im T von Soku no Kite, abgrundtief. Und tatsächlich finden wir hier zwei Wirklichkeiten gegenständlich vorgestellt, das heißt zur Darstellung gebracht. Sie ließen sich ansonsten nicht logisch rekonstruieren. Aber zugleich kommt ihre Einheit dadurch zum Ausdruck, dass der Boden der Einsamkeit und der Schneeregen zusammenfallen. In dem Maße, wie die beiden wie die zwei Wirklichkeiten eines poetischen Textes aneinander teilhaben können, teilen sie sich in einem Bild mit, bringen sich also als ein unmittelbarer Zusammenhang zum Ausdruck, der sich selbst jeder distanzierten Darstellung entzieht. Hier wirkt ein Logos der Sprache, der an einen Ort hinter die logozentrische Neigung objektivierender, fest und darstellender Vernunft führt. Dieser Ort ist allerdings wohl strukturiert. Das Zusammenfallen von Boden und Schnee ist in keinem Sinne willkürlich. Im Gegenteil, ich würde sagen, es ist gewissermaßen so notwendig, dass es schon wirklich ist. Die Struktur der Logos, des Zusammenhangs des Satzes, die hier wirkt, ist nicht das Li des Logos oder gar der Logik, sondern was Nishitani die ungehinderte Durchdringung von Li und Ji nennt. Der Grenze, die die poetische Spannung für uns erzeugt, können wir uns nicht aus der Behaglichkeit der Vogelperspektive inne werden, ohne ihre ästhetische Zumutung völlig zu verfehlen. Hier stehen wir in den Räumen selbst und wir erleben unmittelbar die Grenze, die Einsamkeit und Schneeregen durchsichtig wird. Und zwar genau dann, wenn der Boden der Einsamkeit und der Schneeregen zusammenfallen, wenn sich die Einsamkeit im Fallen des Schnees so mitteilt, dass das Fallen des Schnees an der Einsamkeit teilhat. Das eine im anderen zum Ausdruck kommt. Mitteilen und Teilhaben sind hier offenbar keine meteorologischen Bestimmungen mehr, die eine Ganzheit voraussetzen müssten. Sie sind ästhetische Bestimmungen, die eine Ganzheit evozieren. Der Ort ästhetischen Gelingens, in der sich die ungehinderte Durchdringung von Logos und Sache einstellt, ist nun aber selbst ein begrenzter Ort. So wie die Poesie einerseits die Grenzen logischer Darstellung transzendiert, indem sie aufscheinen und durchsichtig werden lässt, so lässt sie auch ihre eigene Grenze dort aufscheinen, wo sich nicht nur sprachliche Darstellung, sondern selbst dichterischer Ausdruck erschöpfen muss. Diese lustvolle Kraftlosigkeit der Sprache, die sich in einem Schweigen zeigt, das sich nicht aufdrängen darf, sondern gewissermaßen einstellt, schlägt in die ungehinderte Durchdringung von Sache und Sache um. In einen Ort, von dem Nishitani ganz zu Recht sagt, dass man die Dinge hier von innen heraus sieht. Grenzziehung. Zu jedem gesunden Aristotelismus gehört die Vorstellung, dass die Welt als Ganzes endlich ist und begrenzt. Aber schon Epikur hat bekanntermaßen mit Bezug auf das Paradox der Grenze angemerkt, dass diese Vorstellung fragwürdig ist. Was eine Grenze hat, hat einen äußersten Punkt. Und dieser äußerste Punkt lässt sich je nur im Kontrast mit etwas bestimmen, das dahinter liegt. Für die Welt als Kosmos, als Ganzes allen Existierenden, ist eine solche Bestimmung also offenbar widersprüchlich, denn sie würde etwas implizieren, das nicht zur Gesamtheit allen Existierenden gehört. Nishitani unterläuft diese logische Paradoxie der begrenzten Ganzheit, denke ich, indem er einen lebendigen Widerspruch in ihr Zentrum pflanzt. Den konkreten Weltzusammenhang unserer alltäglichen Orientierung lässt Nishitani nämlich aus der Zwischenzone zweier widerstreitender Extreme, der Tatsachen einerseits, der Offenheit der Welt andererseits hervorgehen. Diese beiden Extreme bilden aber nur dann einen Widerspruch, wenn wir sie aus der distanzierten Perspektive des Logos in den Blick nehmen. Aus der Nähe betrachtet zeichnen sich beide Extreme hingegen dadurch aus, dass sie eine solche Perspektive von vornherein abschneiden. Das Extrem der harten Tatsachen verbirgt nämlich, wie Nishitani sagt, die vorlogische Evidenz unserer sinnlichen Wahrnehmung, das Extrem der Offenheit der Welt, die nachlogische Evidenz religiöser Erfahrung. Vom Standpunkt des Logos aus sind diese beiden Bereiche gleichermaßen unzugänglich und sie markieren klassischerweise eine absolute Grenze des Denkens. Diese Grenze des Denkens wird allerdings da, wo sie offenkundig wird, wo sie also auffällig wird, durch das Denken selbst um seinen je eigenen Vollzug gezogen. Das andere, die andere Seite des Denkens, ist so stets jenseits einer Grenze, die nach Überwindung verlangt. Das Paradox der Grenze, dass jede Grenzziehung längst den intimen Kontakt mit dem, was jenseits von ihr liegt, impliziert, gewinnt hier an besonderem Gewicht. Denn sowohl die vorlogische Sinnlichkeit als auch die nachlogische Erfahrung liegen nicht jenseits, sondern radikal diesseits dieser Grenze. Dementsprechend betont Nishitani, dass die, hier zitiere ich, die konkrete und reale Welt als Weltzusammenhang nur dadurch möglich wird, dass sie beide einander entsprechenden Extreme in absoluter Nichtwechselwendigkeit identisch sind. Dieses Zitat stammt, wie auch die Übersetzung von Rijimuge und Jijimuge, von einem noch nicht publizierten Text von Rolf Elberfeld. Das Paradox der Grenze ist hier invers. Die kognitive Distanz, die der Kontakt mit ihm hervorruft, notwendig hervorruft, lässt sich nicht mehr dadurch stillen, dass ich ihr in die vertraute Perspektive des Logos entfliehe. Das, was absolut diesseits dieser Grenze liegt, liegt uns schließlich näher als wir uns selbst. Hier stehen wir an einer seltsam einseitigen Grenze, die schon einmal sehr treffend als torloses Tor bestimmt wurde und die nicht mehr anders mitgeteilt werden kann, als durch die Emphase absolute Offenheit, die für Nishitani noch die Offenheit der Welt ermöglicht. Diese absolute Offenheit ist, wenn ich Nishitani richtig verstehe, die Weltlichkeit der Welt selbst, das profane Hier und Jetzt lebendiger Gegenwart. Das ist, wie wir wissen, nicht eine Rückkehr zu einer naiven Form sinnlicher Unmittelbarkeit und auch keine dialektische Aufhebung zu mittelbarer Unmittelbarkeit. Es ist das sich selbst hervorgehen von Welt oder, wenn wir so wollen, das unmittelbare Mitteilen von Welt, ihr ungehinderter Selbstausdruck, an dem alles, was ist, teilhat. Das performative Moment von Mitteilung und Teilhabe liegt in diesem Punkt der Zuspitzung darin, dass sie gemeinsam eine Grenze zum Ausdruck bringen, die im Text selbst nicht thematisch wird und nicht thematisch werden kann, die Grenze zwischen Text und Lesenden. Dort, wo der Text tut, was er sagt, wird er deswegen keineswegs Poesie und er schlägt auch nicht in die Realisation der Religion um, er bleibt ein Stück Philosophie. Im durchaus Kierkegaardschen Sinne, würde ich sagen, in smule Philosophie. Aber wie Kierkegaards metaphysische Grille zielt auch Nishitanis philosophischer Brocken auf eine Mitteilung, die darauf aus ist, ins Wahre zu täuschen. Dankeschön.
Wir haben 30 Minuten. Tobias?
Ja, wenn ich anfangen darf. Auf Deutsch werde ich eine Frage formulieren, wenn das in Ordnung ist. Vielen Dank für den Vortrag, der, finde ich, sehr, sehr schön klar nochmal gemacht hat, was der Unterschied ist innerhalb des Bereichs der, wie wurde es auf Deutsch übersetzt, der Digimuge. Ja. Der Unterschied zwischen wissenschaftlichem Logos innerhalb von Digimuge und poetischem Ausdruck, der das durchscheinen lässt. Ja, das fand ich sehr schön herausgearbeitet.
Ja.
Da gibt es aber, und daran schließt sich jetzt meine Frage an, gab es einen Ausdruck, den ich besonders bemerkenswert fand in dem Exposé. Und zwar hast du gesprochen von einer lustvollen Kraftlosigkeit. Eine lustvolle Kraftlosigkeit, durch die sich der Übergang von Poesie in den Bereich der einander unbehindert durchdringenden Dinge vollziehe. Ja. Was ist das für ein Ausdruck? Woher kommt dieser Ausdruck lustvolle Kraftlosigkeit? Und muss diese Kraftlosigkeit unbedingt lustvoll sein? Ne? Das frage ich mich, ja. Oder frag vielmehr dich. Ja. Vielen Dank.
Danke, Tobias, für die Frage. Der Ausdruck geht tatsächlich auf meine Kappe. Und ich meine damit vor allem erstens, dass diese Sprachlosigkeit eine Widerfahrenes sein wird, dass es also kein Schweigen ist, in das man sich einüben könnte, meine ich, sondern es ist etwas, das einem passiert, something that happens to you. Und dass diese Erfahrungen und das Schweigen selbst lustvoll sind. Du hast völlig recht, das ist keine erschöpfende Qualifikation dieses Schweigens, das wäre eine Zumutung. Aber ich denke, ich habe es als Kontrapunkt gesetzt zu der Schwere des Schweigens, die wir zumindest in der westlichen Tradition gern damit verbinden. Und zumindest glaube ich, dass da, wo der Kipppunkt gewissermaßen gelingt, wo es ist ja keine im doppelten Sinne Aufgabe der Poesie, sozusagen, es ist kein Scheitern der Poesie an diesem Punkt, sondern auf eine gewisse Weise ja ihre Erfüllung. Und ich glaube, das war einfach nur der Punkt für mich, diesen Ausdruck zu wählen, dass ich von der Schwere des Schweigens weg wollte. Aber du hast völlig recht, es ist nicht notwendigerweise eine lustvolle oder glückselige Erfahrung. Ich meine aber, dass sie eher in der Nähe der Leichtigkeit, in der Schwere zu suchen ist, wenn sie sich einstellt. Das meine ich schon. Lustvoll ist vielleicht ein bisschen zu emphatisch, aber ich denke, wir tun gut daran, es von der Schwere zu lösen, die wir gern mit dieser Ausdruckslosigkeit verbinden.
Ja, das leuchtet mir sehr ein. Danke. Ja,
Sensei, auf Englisch oder auf Deutsch? Vielleicht auf Deutsch ist besser.
Ja, ich ziehe Deutsch vor.
Ja.
Ich mich ein bisschen besser ausdrücken kann. Habe ich recht zu sagen, dass du zunächst die Metapher von Nishitani heranziehst, um zu sagen, es handelt sich vielleicht im Grunde um den gesunden Aristotelismus? Oder ist das mein Missverständnis? Das ist meine erste Frage, ob mein Eindruck stimmt oder nicht. Um den Sinn meiner Frage ein bisschen deutlicher zu machen, möchte ich eine zweite Frage stellen. Wie wäre, wenn zwei Räume A und B im Metapher von Nishitani nicht räumlich verstanden wird, sondern räumliches Verständnis würde auch Recht haben. Nishitani hat zunächst alles zu diesem Metapher alles räumlich erklärt. Wie wäre aber, wenn der Raum A das Leben und der Raum B Tod bedeuten kann? Wäre dann die Sachlage gleich oder anders? Mit dieser zweiten Frage deute ich auch Folgendes an. Für Nishitani, soweit ich ihn verstehe, ist die sehr wichtige Sache im philosophischen Denken, die Noesis Noeseos ist. Er betont immer wieder die Bedeutung von Noesis Noeseos. Und soweit ich diesen Ausdruck verstehe, bedeutet dieses Noesis Noeseos völlig der extreme Kontrast zum Vogelschau. Und Vogelschau und Aristotelismus sind im Grunde gleich, denke ich. Wenn Nishitani immer wieder betont, was er in Kuto Soku nicht unbedingt thematisiert, wenn Noesis Noeseos angewendet wird, sozusagen, in der zunächst räumlichen Logik von der Metapher. Zwei Räume. Und zwar, wobei der Raum A, das Leben, der Raum B, der Tod, den Tod bedeutet. Wäre dann welcher Fall gültig gemacht werden kann? Aristotelismus, aristotelischer Vogelschau oder Noesis Noeseos? Das ist meine zweite Frage. Und um meine Frage etwas konkreter zu machen, zitiere ich ein Wort, das Nishitani zitiert aus Dogen. In meiner Übersetzung würde das Wort lauten, ein Vogel fliegt wie ein Vogel. Der Fisch schwimmt so, dass er ähnlich wie Fisch ist. Dieser fliegende Vogel, das ist Raum A. Wie ein Vogel, das ist Raum B. So könnte man zunächst sagen. Wenn man sieht, dass ein Vogel fliegt, denkt man, aha, ein Vogel fliegt. Dogen sagt, und Nishitani sagt mit Dogen, das ist, dass der Vogel, der fliegt, ist etwa ähnlich wie Vogel. Wie würdest du, sozusagen den Kritik an Vogelschau etwas deutlicher zu machen? Vogelschau würde heißen, aha, ein Vogel fliegt. Aber Dogen und Nishitani sagt, wie ein Vogel. Wie würdest du dieses wie verstehen? Das ist meine dritte Frage, die die ersten zwei Fragen etwas deutlicher, konkreter machen. So.
Danke, Rioski. Das gibt mir die Möglichkeit, das noch ein bisschen klarer zu machen. Also das, was ich den gesunden Aristotelismus genannt habe, ist eine Anerkennung von Nishitanis Redlichkeit gewissermaßen. Das, was ich so nenne, ist nur gültig für den Bereich von Riji Muge offenbar. Und es hilft gewissermaßen meinem phänomenologischen Blick, der immer ein bisschen auf die Methodologie von Texten schaut. Und ich habe große, große Schwierigkeiten mit diesem Text gehabt, schon seit langer Zeit, bis ich das Gefühl hatte, ihn auch als einen Text über eine philosophische Methodologie lesen zu können und mir das zu erlauben. Und in dem Fall ist der gesunde Aristotelismus eine methodische Voraussetzung, um überhaupt angeben zu können, wie es sich mit dem Übergang von im weitesten Sinne logischen Formen der Sprachvermittlung zu poetischen Formen und darüber hinaus verhält. Insofern ist das eine Zwischenstufe, die der darstellenden Qualität philosophischer Sprache sozusagen entspricht und der auch Genüge tut. Und das ist überhaupt keine, also das meine ich überhaupt nicht kritisch in irgendeinem Sinne. Aber es ermöglicht eben die Grenze von Riji Muge anzugeben. Und wenn man die räumliche Metapher und damit den Vogelflug und die distanzierte Form logozentrischer Betrachtung ersetzt und schon an die Grenze der Poetik geht, wenn man so will, und A und B eben mit Leben und Tod füllt, dann ist man, glaube ich, mit Nishitani in der Lage, den Umschlagpunkt von einem Verständnis von Leiji-Muge und Jiji-Muge anzugeben, in dem Maße, wie man das Bild, was er ja so glücklich gewählt hat in Was ist Religion, der doppelten Belichtung von Leben und Tod. Und in dem Bild erübrigt sich im Prinzip die Frage, die wir uns stellen, aber dadurch erübrigt sich auch die methodologische Zuspitzung der Grenzproblematik. Denn es ist ja keine, und ich hoffe, das habe ich zeigen können, keine Problematik, die der Überwindung ausharrt oder so etwas, sondern ich halte es für eine absolut brillante Form philosophischer Architektur, einen Text so aufzubauen, dass die Spannung und das Paradox der Grenze nicht einfach problematisiert wird, sondern fruchtbar gemacht wird. Das gelingt ihm, glaube ich, ausgezeichnet. Was den fliegenden Vogel und das Fliegen des wie ein Vogel angeht, so würde ich sagen, meine Assoziation wäre von Nishitani her, dass wir, wenn wir zum Beispiel von dem Paradox der Grenze ausdenken, dann haben wir eine gewisse philosophische Tendenz, die dann entsteht, wenn wir zu lange und zu ausschließlich mit logozentrischen Formen der Sprache zu tun haben, dann entwickelt sich gewissermaßen eine natürliche Gegenintuition. Und diese Gegenintuition erschöpft sich meistens in einem ziemlich vulgären Begriff von Einheit oder Gleichheit oder dem All oder meinetwegen auch dem Nichts. Aber diese Begriffe, die sich aus dieser logozentrischen Sprachvorstellung und den harten Grenzen des Leiji-Muge ergeben, die brauchen gewissermaßen eine emphatische Form von Gegengewicht, und die lässt sich zum Beispiel durch sozusagen die Trivialität von deiktischen Ausdrücken zeigen. Fliegender Vogel. Und auf eine gewisse Weise kann das sowohl der völlig im logozentrischen Denken verhaftete Geist, als auch der ihm völlig entratene Geist sich auf diese Weise zum Ausdruck bringen, würde ich meinen. Aber da ist eben ein Unterschied. Und der Unterschied ist, glaube ich, die Strecke, die trivialerweise zurückgelegt werden muss zwischen diesen beiden sich am Ende aus der Distanz her ununterscheidbaren Zustände. Und um diese Distanz gewissermaßen noch zum Ausdruck bringen zu können, würde ich sagen, ist das Wie des Vogels wie eine Distanzgeste, die aber auch nur als Kipppunkt funktioniert, ein bisschen wie das Te in Soku-no-kite. Es ist sozusagen das Eingeständnis, dass der Wunsch nach Einheit, der sich aus dieser völligen Dispartheit des logischen Denken ergibt, letzten Endes auch nur eine Affirmation dieser Art des Denkens ist und dass das, dem wir eigentlich nachdenken, wenn es zum Beispiel um nicht-duale Formen des Erlebens geht, dass man aufpassen muss mit diesen vulgären Formen von Einheitsromantizismus. Das wäre meine Intuition.
Deine Intuition ein bisschen konkreter zu machen, stelle ich eine weitere Frage. Würdest du sagen, dass der fliegende Vogel, der gesehen wird, der Vogel selbst oder nicht Vogel selbst? Damit möchte ich auch andeutend sagen, dass die Erklärung irgendwie der gesunde Aristotelismus ist sozusagen das Denken des Begründens. Es gibt ein weiteres Wort, das für Nishitani sehr, sehr, sehr wichtig ist. Das ist der Ungrund, wie Schelling in seiner Freiheitsabhandlung. denkt. Und Nishitani versteht diesen Ungrund. Und dieser Ungrund kann nicht genug ausgedrückt werden oder erklärt werden oder formuliert werden mit der Metapher von zwei Räumen. Die Zwei-Räume-Metapher ist immer noch Begründung, wie du auch sicherlich sozusagen gespürt hast. Und jede Metapher hat eine Grenze. Und die Grenze, an dieser Grenze der Metapher nimmt etwas Anteil, nämlich das, was nicht mit der Metapher begründet werden kann. Das ist der Ungrund. Und der Ungrund ist das, was nicht logisch erklärt werden kann, was auch Problem von Schelling war. Ne? Und der Ungrund könnte nur dann, so verstehe ich, der Ungrund könnte nur dann verstanden werden, wenn man nur mit Noesis Noeseos in die Sache selbst geht. Wobei diese Sache auch das sonst als gegensätzlich verstandene Leben und Tod enthält. Ne? So, diesen Gedanken etwas konkreter zu machen, würdest du sagen, dass der fliegende Vogel der Vogel selbst oder nicht?
So wirklich, wie er sein kann. Der Punkt, an dem sich diese Frage stellt oder stellen lässt, ist gewissermaßen der Punkt, an dem man sich entscheiden muss, wie man das, wonach die Frage fragt, zum Ausdruck bringt. Und ich glaube, das Problem von Noesis Noesios zum Beispiel ist ein Versuch, etwas auf den Begriff zu bringen, das ein bisschen wie der fliegende Vogel ist und nicht das Wie des fliegenden Vogels. Aber wenn wir das philosophische Problem anerkennen, sind wir unter Umständen nicht so sehr daran interessiert, einfach einen Begriff zu haben, sondern den Begriff in irgendeinem Zusammenhang auch ordnen zu können. Und insofern halte ich Schellings Scheitern im und am Ungrund für philosophisch viel redlicher als die Entwicklung eines Begriffs von Noesis Noesios. Und was mich gereizt hat an Nishitanis Text in diesem Fall, ist, dass er von der Entwicklung philosophischer Architektur, meine ich, näher an Schelling ist als am Noesis Noesios Begriff, weil er zeigt etwas und dieses Zeigen wirkt in meinem Verständnis der Methode tiefer als es sagen zu können. Und insofern würde ich deine Frage beantworten mit well, that depends. Das kommt darauf an.
Würdest du dann sagen, du hast Wittgenstein zitiert. Und der sagt auch, worüber man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. Und das ist, es handelt sich um die Grenze der Sprache. Und Noesis Noesios wäre als die Sache vielleicht der Punkt, worüber man nicht sprechen kann. Wenn man darüber spricht, das ist Widerspruch. So soll man schweigen. Aber das Schweigen ist nicht bloß negativ, sondern auch sozusagen Noesis Noesios. Er zitiert auch dieses Wort Noesis Noesios ganz am Ende der Enzyklopädie. Aber nur am Ende der Enzyklopädie. womit er andeutet, dass seine ganze Logik der Ausdruck von Noesis Noesios ist. Aber gerade diesen Punkt, den Wittgenstein erwähnt, den hat er vielleicht wiederum logisch mit Aristotelismus zum Ausdruck gebracht. Schelling aber nicht. Er war vielleicht redlich, obwohl er am und im Ungrund, wie du sagst, gescheitert hat. Insofern ist er redlich, kann man sagen, denke ich. Nun, ob Nishitani auch in diesem Sinne redlich war, das ist meine Frage. Wenn er immer wieder betont, Jijimuge ist, kann man als Metapher mit Metapher von 2 Räumen erklären. Aber wie gesagt, Metapher hat immer eine Grenze. Und was über die Metapher hinausgeht, wird nicht oder sozusagen als der Punkt angesehen werden, der entweder oder kann ich so sagen, entweder diese Metapher ist zu kurz oder als Grenze des sprachlichen Ausdrucks als das verstanden wird, worüber man nicht sprechen kann. So auch der Vogel.
Ja. Und das meinte ich mit dem performativen Moment dieses Überganges, also eine Metapher zu verwenden und ihre Grenze nicht zu zeigen in einem Text, das ist einfach schlechte Philosophie, aber eine Metapher zu benutzen und gleichzeitig das Werkzeug zur Verfügung zu stellen, zu zeigen, dass sie begrenzt ist. Das ist ausgezeichnete Philosophie, finde ich, weil es wäre halt für manche Formen des Philosophierens natürlich befriedigend, wenn man diesen Punkt dann auch noch zum Gegenstand des Textes macht und dann darüber etwas sagt. Aber ich denke, den reiferen Formen des Philosophierens widert diese Art des Schreibens irgendwann an, weil man nie an den Punkt kommt, um den es eigentlich geht. Und man kann ja so viel über Sprachlosigkeit und Schweigen schreiben und sich an diesem scheinbaren Paradox irgendwie ergötzen, wie man will. Aber der eigentliche Punkt ist, dass man den Spielraum, der sich auftut, irgendwie gestaltet. Und das ist mit meiner sehr bescheidenen Kenntnis von Nishitani etwas, das ich bisher in allen Texten von ihm finde. Und hier hat es mich sehr, sehr lange gekostet, es zu sehen, aber umso überzeugter bin ich, dass es diesen Punkt gibt bei ihm. Und es ist nicht die Redlichkeit von Schelling, die ist überhaupt schwer zu finden, aber ich erlebe es als eine sehr redliche Form des Philosophierens, trotzdem, genau weil er scheitert und die Möglichkeit gibt, das Scheitern zu artikulieren. Und das ist eine Menge.
Ja, danke.
Danke.
Yes.
Ja, wenn ich dann nochmal nachhaken darf, im Anschluss an die Diskussion jetzt, und zwei Textstellen noch aus dem zweiten oder dem letzten Teil deines Exposés aufgreifen darf. Und zwar auch in Verbindung zu dem Vortrag, den wir davor gehört hatten von Francesca. Da tauchte in deinem Vortrag auch interessanterweise in Bezug auf die Domäne des Jijimuge und die Erfahrung dort, tauchte der Ausdruck abschneiden auf. Ja, und zwar auch gerade in Bezug auf die Vogelperspektive, wenn ich es richtig im Gedächtnis behalten habe, dass also in dem Bereich, wo auch der poetische Ausdruck nach dem Augenblick der Erschöpfung übergeht in den anderen Bereich, in den anderen Zustand. Da ist die Perspektive, diese Vogelperspektive, die gesunde aristotelische Perspektive abgeschnitten. Und das fand ich auch wieder einen bemerkenswerten Ausdruck, denn das scheint so zu klingen, als bliebe da etwas außen vor, ja, oder bliebe etwas auf der Strecke dorthin. Ja. Also in Bezug auf die Frage, die ich vorhin auch Francesca gestellt habe, in Bezug auf das auf Englisch, ja, cutting off, ja, ob das nicht ein wesentlicher Teil dieses Schnitts ist, dass da etwas abgeschnitten wird, abgetrennt wird, ja, dass sich nicht wieder verbindet, dass auch nicht einfach nur eine räumliche Distanz markiert, sondern das wirklich außen vor bleiben muss. Und inwiefern ist dieser Schnitt als Abschnitt, als Abschneiden, gerade insofern es sich gegen die Perspektive richtet, sagen auch ein Abschneiden vielleicht dessen, was in dem Bereich von Digimuge ja, als Subjektivität, als poetische Subjektivität, als poetisches Subjekt, ja, als theoretisches Subjekt ja, zeigt, darstellt, ja, präsentiert. Inwiefern ist dieser Schnitt sozusagen etwas, das dieses Subjekt affiziert? Ja? Inwiefern muss sozusagen das Subjekt auf der Strecke bleiben, damit die Dinge sich dann ungehindert durchdringen können? Ja? Das würde mich interessieren. Und dann in Bezug auf die Redlichkeit von Nishitani fand ich das bemerkenswert, wie du im letzten Satz deines Vortrags formulierst, ja, dass Nishitani sehr geschickt darin sei, ja, uns als Leser ja, zur Wahrheit hin zu täuschen. Also ob die Redlichkeit Nishitanis nicht eine, sagen, Redlichkeit der Täuschung ist, ob er nicht sozusagen redlich im Täuschen sei. Aber wer ist dann der Getäuschte? Ja, und inwiefern verbindet sich die Diskussion gerade eben mit Professor Ohashi über das Scheitern, ja, und das Scheitern können mit diesem Moment des geschickten Täuschens. Ja. Wer ist sozusagen am Ende der Gescheiterte, wer ist der Enttäuschte und wer bleibt als Abgeschnittener auf der Strecke? Ja. Das würde mich alles interessieren. Ja.
Danke, Tobias. Also die Formulierung, die ich nutze am Anfang, ich fürchte, dass das eine Verlegenheitslösung von mir ist, weil ich mit diesem Punkt am Ende dieser beiden Extreme und ihrer völligen Nichtwechselwendigkeit große Schwierigkeiten hatte. Und was mir aber klar war, und daher kam auch die Intuition dieses performativen Moments, dass wenn ich diese Metapher des Raumes habe und dann sozusagen in dem am höchsten Punkt der Spekulation, um das so zu sagen, ich immer noch dastehe mit zwei widerstreitenden Extremen, den harten Fakten und der Offenheit der Welt, die ja beide schon an der maximalen Grenze der Artikulierbarkeit, wenigstens im Sinne des Rigimuge oder des Aristotelismus sind, dann ist die Möglichkeit, dazu noch etwas zu sagen, ja relativ überschaubar. Ich kann das in Gesten der Vermeidung machen, ich kann das in Gesten der dialektischen Übertünchung machen, ich kann das in Gesten der Entgrenzung in eine Praxis machen, oder ich kann es, meine ich, eben poetisch machen, und dann ist das sozusagen eine fast nicht merkliche Form von Eingriff. Und dadurch, dass sich über diesen Punkt in irgendeinem befriedigenden Sinne eigentlich nichts mehr sagen lässt, weil die Befriedigung, die ich mir wünsche, eben eine Form der Sprache in Anspruch nehmen müsste, die an der Stelle bereits erschöpft ist, und selbst ihr poetisches Substitut ist an der Stelle eigentlich schon erschöpft. Aber ich will eben nicht in die Emphase des religiösen Schweigens, und ich will auch nicht in die Emphase der Dialektik. So, dann bin ich gewissermaßen in einem Moment philosophischer und poetischer Spannung. Und ich glaube in der Tat, deswegen habe ich den Ausdruck da benutzt oder gebraucht vielmehr, dass es an diesen Punkten extremer Zuspitzung die Möglichkeit gibt, und das ist eine prinzipielle Möglichkeit, ich habe manchmal verwechsel ich die mit einer psychologischen Möglichkeit, das wäre gefährlich, aber die Zuspitzung selbst, und das ist das performative Moment des Textes, kann so als Zumutung erlebt werden, dass in dem Maße, wie ich mir den logischen Zugriff wünsche, weil ich darauf trainiert bin und das Scheitern an mir selbst erlebe, in dem Moment wird tatsächlich etwas abgeschnitten. Ich habe Schwierigkeiten, das mit einfach der subjektiven Perspektive zu identifizieren, aber es hat auf jeden Fall mit einem Grundreflex der Vergegenständlichung zu tun. Und in dem Fall hat es auch mit einem Grundreflex reflexiver also der Selbstvergegenständlichung zu tun. Und ich denke, an beide Punkte werden an dieser Spitze der Anspannung letztlich ununterscheidbar. Und was auf der Strecke bleibt, wäre in dem Fall vielleicht nicht Subjektivität, aber in jedem Fall reflexiv vergegenständlichende Form des Selbst, weil sie, würde ich meinen, auf sehr intime Weise mit diesem logozentrischen Verständnis von Weltzugriff verbunden sind, weil es einfach die Rückseite unseres auf Gegenständlichkeit hin orientierten Daseins ist. Und diese Form des Selbstverlustes, der Verlust der gegenständlichen Vorstellung von uns selbst, ist, meine ich, der Punkt, auf den Nishitani mit diesen beiden Extremen abzielt. Einmal es fällt mir kein besseres Wort, in der regressiven Form der unmittelbaren sinnlichen Gewissheit und in der progressiven Form religiöser Erfahrung, und den Punkt auszuzeichnen, an dem diese beiden Extreme ununterscheidbar sind. Das, was auf der Strecke bleibt, ist mindestens das reflexive Selbstverständnis, meine ich. Aber
dürfte ich ganz kurz dann daran einhaken und nochmal die Formulierung oder die Frage, die immer weiter zugespitzte Frage von Professor Ohashi aufgreifend, ja, ob es der Vogel selbst sei, ja, der fliegt, ein wenig ein wenig paraphrasieren. Und in Bezug auf den Text scheint es mir so, man könnte auch die Metapher, wenn es eine ist, ja, könnte man anwenden und fragen oder sagen, zunächst einmal als Aussage, nicht? In diesem Text, ja, scheint es so, ja, Nishitani denkt, ja, also es scheint so, ja, als würde Nishitani denken, ja. Ja, so wie der Vogel erscheint als fliegender Vogel, ja. Er scheint zu fliegen. Ja. Und die Frage von Professor Ohashi deswegen aufgreifend, ja, müsste man fragen, ist es Nishitani selbst, der denkt? Ja. Denkt hier Nishitani selbst? Ja. Oder könnte nicht darin vielleicht dieses am Ende angesprochene Moment der Täuschung oder auch der Kraftlosigkeit liegen, dass da etwas geschieht? Du hast es gerade angesprochen mit dem Moment der Reflexivität. Und ich glaube, das berührt vielleicht den Punkt, auf den Professor Ohashi mit Noesis Noesios anspielen oder zuspielen wollte. Ja? Dieses Moment der Selbstreflexion oder des selber Denkens, ja, das dort auftaucht. Ja, ist es der Vogel selbst, der fliegt, und ist es Nishitani selbst, der denkt? Ja. Was findet dieses Denken statt, ja, in diesem Text?
Ja, es ist, ich bin vorsichtig, einfach weil es sich im Ursprung um eine Philosophie in einer Sprache handelt, die ich nicht auf dem Niveau beherrsche, die mir das erlauben würde. Von europäischen Form der Grammatik würde ich sagen, ist es für mich eindeutig, dass diese Umschlagpunkte und auch der Punkt der Täuschung der Umschlag ist von Personalität zu Impersonalität. Und insofern wäre die Antwort auf die Frage, ob der Vogel fliegt oder ob Nishitani denkt, ganz einfach nein, es fliegt ein Vogel und es denkt. Und diesen Punkt philosophisch fruchtbar zu machen, ist außerordentlich heikel, weil er halt auch sowohl in die ontologische als auch in die praktologische Phase abzudriften droht. Aber deswegen scheint mir der methodologische Weg gewissermaßen für mich der angemessene und für mich der redliche, warum ich mit dieser Figur des Täuschens ins Wahre ende, das natürlich nicht von mir stammt, sondern das stammt von Kierkegaard aus den unwissenschaftlichen Nachschriften zu dem philosophischen Brocken, wo er vom Bedrage i Wahrheiten spricht, von dem Täuschen ins Wahre. Und auch da ist es eine Strategie, die bei der es um eine Mitteilung von etwas gibt, das sich auf gewisse Weise nur indirekt mitteilen lässt, das aber zutiefst mit dem religiösen Erfahrung eines, in dem Fall christologischen Paradoxes zu tun hat. Und ich bin sehr, sehr glücklich über unsere Zuspitzung, weil mir langsam auch die Sprache ausgeht. Aber das würde ich sagen, mit dem Vorbehalt, dass es sich hier um japanische Philosophie und um japanisches Philosophieren handelt, würde ich sagen, dass wir die Kipppunkte von personaler zu impersonalen Formen des Sprechens an der Stelle ernst nehmen müssen, weil sie oft als Verlegenheitsausdrücke eingeführt werden. Das liegt aber, glaube ich, nur daran, dass wir die, wie soll man sagen, die logische Spannung, die sie ganz prinzipiell haben, nicht ernst nehmen. Zumindest in der westlichen Tradition kann man das sehr, sehr klar zeigen, dass die absolute logische Zumutung, die in impersonalen Konstruktionen steckt, schlicht und ergreifend niemand interessiert hat, beziehungsweise hinreichend geängstigt hat, um es nicht zu thematisieren von sehr, sehr wenigen Denkern abgesehen. Ja, das wäre meine Antwort.
Vielen Dank. Ich glaube, es konnte die Zeit angekommen sein, zu Ende zu gehen. Maybe we can finish now. It's 6 o'clock in Japan. So, thank you. Thank you to everyone for join us in this second Nishitani workshop. And in our purpose is that we continue to organize in this kind of event, if possible, twice a year. So in this moment it's very vague, but probably next year in May, if we continue constantly, we would like to organize the third meeting on Nishitani's philosophy. And so I hope that you will join us also in May. And so for today is all. So thank you very much once again. Thank you.